I'm underwater, pressure crushing my lungs, the murky darkness of the Gulf pressing in from all sides. Above me, Deepwater Horizon 6 burns against the night sky, orange flames licking upward like the tongues of ancient monsters. Below me, something moves in the depths, something enormous and patient that's been waiting since before mankind first set foot on Louisiana soil. But the worst part isn't the fire or the thing in the deep, it's the faces. My crew suspended in the black water around me, skin sloughing off in strips, eyes milky white, mouths open in silent screams. And they're reaching for me, fingers stretching toward my face, not swimming, but somehow moving closer. I wake up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, the taste of Gulf water still in my mouth, though I've been on dry land for 3 days. My doctor calls it PTSD, says it's normal after what happened, but there's nothing normal about what I experienced on that rig. My name is Marcus Thibodeau, born and raised in Morgan City, Louisiana, where the Atchafalaya River empties into the Gulf. I'm 36 years old, divorced, with a daughter I see every other weekend when I'm not offshore. Before last month, I was the night shift supervisor on Deepwater Horizon 6, a drilling platform about 70 miles southwest of Port Fourchon. Good money. It had to be, for the risk and isolation. 18 years in the oil business, and I thought I'd seen everything the Gulf could throw at us. Hurricanes, equipment failures, the occasional injury. But nothing prepared me for what happened after we drilled past 30,000 feet. I wasn't supposed to be on that rotation. I was filling in for Raon Delgado, who'd called in with food poisoning from some bad crawfish at Tufets. The company helicopter dropped me at the platform on a Tuesday evening, the sun already sinking into the horizon, painting the sky and water in shades of crimson. Bad omen, my grandmother would have said. Lie in the sky and blood. She was Cajun to the bone, filled my childhood with stories of rougarou and faux follet and all manner of things hiding in the swamp. I never believed them. I should have. The platform manager, Bill Hutchkins, met me on the helipad, a tall guy from Texas with a perpetual sunburn and a handshake like a vice grip. He didn't seem himself that evening. Distracted, jumpy. Marcus, he said, voice tight. Good to see you. Listen, Raon usually handles the night shift, and he's got a system, some procedures that aren't in the official manual. I laughed. What, like his lucky hard hat or something? Bill didn't smile back. There's a list in the supervisor's office. Set of rules. They might seem strange, but they're important. The crew knows them. Follow them to the letter. You understand? Sure, Bill, I said, still thinking it was some kind of joke or initiation ritual. Maybe Raon had put him up to it. 6 hours later, when I heard the first knocking from beneath the drilling platform, I realized it wasn't a joke at all. The supervisor's office was a cramped space at the end of the main hallway, walls covered in safety notices, equipment manuals, and a large diagram of the platform. A desk with 3 monitors displaying various drilling metrics took up most of the room. I settled into Raon's chair, still adjusting to the constant hum and vibration that was life on an oil rig. On the desk, weighed down by a coffee mug emblazoned with Le Bon Temps rule, was a worn manila folder. Inside, I found several typed pages with Protocol DH6N printed at the top. Below that, in bold red letters, Night Shift Procedures, Mandatory. The first page contained standard operating procedures, nothing unusual, safety protocols, emergency contacts, shift change checklists. But as I flipped to the second page, the rules began to deviate from anything I'd seen in my 18 years of offshore work. Rule 1. Between the hours of 1 a.m. and 5 a.m., all external lights on the eastern side of the platform must be turned off. No exceptions. Rule 2. If the temperature in the drill shaft drops below 36 degrees Fairfax, immediately initiate emergency shutdown sequence 5C and evacuate all personnel from the lower deck. Do not resume operations until the temperature returns to normal, minimum 3 hours. Rule 3. Should you hear knocking from beneath the platform, respond with exactly 3 knocks in return, no more, no less. Then proceed to the southern railing and drop 1 cup of fresh water into the Gulf. Rule 4. Any crew member who reports seeing lights beneath the water is to be immediately relieved of duty and confined to quarters until the morning shift. Rule 5. If the radio picks up a voice speaking Cajun French, do not respond. Turn off all communications equipment for exactly 17 minutes. Rule 6. In the event of a drill bit replacement, the old bit must be destroyed completely. Do not discard it intact into the water. Rule 7. If you see a crew member you don't recognize, or if a known crew member appears disoriented or unusual, ask them, how's the weather in Huma? The correct response is wet this time of year. Any other response requires immediate containment in the panic room. I stared at the page, convinced it was some elaborate prank. Rayon was known for his sense of humor, but remembering Bill's expression, the tension in his voice, this didn't feel like a joke. As if summoned by my thoughts, my radio crackled. Supervisor? Mrs. Jenkins at drill control. You might want to come down here. The drill control room was the heart of the operation, a wall of monitors and control panels that managed our intrusion into the Gulf seabed. Jenkins, a weathered veteran with 30 years of experience, stood before the main pressure gauge, his face grim. We just hit 30,012 feet, he said without preamble. Pressure readings are unusual. I glanced at the gauge. The needle swung erratically, pulsing like a heartbeat. Equipment malfunction? I asked. Jenkins shook his head. Calibrated it myself yesterday. This is real. He lowered his voice. You read Rayon's instructions? Just finished. You want to tell me what the hell is going on? Been on this rig 8 months. Rayon's rules kept us alive. Don't ask me to explain them, but ignore them at your peril. He tapped the pressure gauge. Something's down there, boss. Something that doesn't want to be disturbed. Before I could respond, a low, resonant knock echoed through the control room. 3 distinct sounds like metal striking metal from beneath us. Jenkins paled. That's rule 3. Better answer it. My mouth went dry. This is insane. Do it now, or we'll all regret it. Feeling ridiculous, I knelt and knocked 3 times on the floor. The sound echoed metallically. Now the water, Jenkins urged. Southern railing. 1 cup. Fresh water. Hurry. I grabbed a bottle of Kentwood Springs from the cooler, snatched a coffee mug from the counter, and hurried to the southern section of the platform. The night air was thick with humidity, the distant lights of other rigs twinkling on the horizon like earthbound stars. At the railing, I filled the mug, hesitated, then poured it over the side. The water seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have, as if reluctant to rejoin the Gulf. When I returned, Jenkins had pulled up the underwater camera feed. Look, he said, pointing to the screen. The murky view showed our drilling equipment extending into the darkness, but just at the edge of visibility, something moved. Large. Sinuous. A darker shadow against the deep. What the hell is that? I whispered. Don't know. Don't want to know. Jenkins switched off the feed, but we've got 4 more hours of night shift, and I guarantee that's not the last time we'll need to follow the rules. He was right. At 2:13 a.m., the temperature in the drill shaft plummeted to 34 degrees Fahrenheit despite the warm Gulf waters. We initiated shutdown sequence 5C and evacuated the lower deck. At 3:45, the radio crackled with a woman's voice, speaking rapid Cajun French, my grandmother's native tongue. I understood enough to make my skin crawl. Laissez-nous monter. Nous avons faim. Let us up. We are hungry. By the time dawn broke, painting the horizon in gentle pinks and oranges, I'd followed 5 of Raon's 7 rules. The crew avoided my questions, exchanging knowing looks but offering no explanations. As I prepared for the morning shift handover, Bill appeared at my door. You made it through the night, he said. It wasn't a question. Barely. What the hell is going on, Bill? What are we drilling into? He sighed, shoulders slumping. Come with me. There's something you need to see. Bill led me through the maze of corridors to a section of the platform I'd never visited before. Unlike the well-lit main areas, this passage was dimly illuminated and ended at a heavy steel door marked Restricted Authorized Personnel Only. He punched a code into the keypad and the door hissed open. What I'm about to show you isn't in any company manual, Marcus. This stays between us and the night crew. Inside was a small room dominated by sophisticated monitoring equipment. 3 large screens displayed different views, one showing seismic readings, another thermal imaging of the seabed beneath us, and the third what appeared to be sonar. A man in his 60s sat before the monitors, his weathered face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. He didn't look like a typical Transocean employee. No uniform, just a faded LSU sweatshirt and jeans. "This is Dr. Etienne Mouton," Bill said. "Oceanographer from Louisiana State. Company brought him in 2 months ago." Dr. Mouton nodded, eyes still fixed on the screens. "You've had an eventful night, Mr. Thibodeau." "That's one way to put it," I replied. "Mind telling me what's going on? What are we drilling into down there?" He swiveled his chair to face me. "Something that's been down there a very long time. The company knew there was an anomaly in this region, unusual seismic readings, magnetic disturbances. They thought it might be a large methane pocket, very valuable." He clicked a few keys, and the central monitor displayed a 3D rendering of the seabed beneath the platform. A massive dark zone pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. "But this isn't methane, is it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No." Dr. Mouton pointed to the image. "We believe it's organic, living." My mouth went dry. "Living? You mean like a whale? Much larger and much older." He switched to another image, this one grainy and difficult to make out. "This was captured 3 months ago when we first breached the outer membrane." The image clarified slightly, and I had to grip the edge of the console to steady myself. What looked like an enormous eye stared back at the camera, its pupil contracting in response to the light. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "Not quite," Dr. Mouton said grimly. "But people once worshipped it as something similar. The Chitimacha tribe of southern Louisiana had legends about Nakshito, the great fish that sleeps beneath the waters. Colonial accounts from the early French settlers mention tribal warnings about waking that which sleeps in the deep. So Ramon's rules, protocols developed through trial and error? They'll work," Bill interjected. "After we disturbed it, things started happening. Strange things. We lost 3 men before we established the patterns." "Lost? You mean they died?" Bill and Dr. Mouton exchanged glances. "Not exactly," the doctor said carefully. "They changed, began acting erratically, complained about voices in their heads. Then they tried to damage the platform. Specifically, they tried to disable the emergency shutoff valves on the drilling equipment." "As if something wanted us to keep drilling," I murmured, the implications sinking in. "Precisely," Dr. Mouton nodded. "When we restrained them, their physical deterioration accelerated. Skin lesions, rapid weight loss, eyes clouding over. Within 48 hours, they were unrecognizable." "Where are they now?" Another uncomfortable glance between them. "They escaped," Bill said flatly. "Broke out during a storm 3 weeks ago. Dove into the Gulf. We never found the bodies." The doctor tapped a few keys, bringing up footage from a different camera. "But we did find this 2 days later." The video showed the underside of the platform. 3 figures clung to the support structures. Humanoid, but wrong. Limbs too long, movements jerky and unnatural. Their skin had a grayish, waterlogged appearance, and when one turned toward the camera, its eyes were milky white. "That's Harkins," Bill said quietly, pointing to the figure on the left. "Was our assistant driller, family man. 2 kids in Lafayette." I felt bile rise in my throat. "And you're still drilling after this?" "Company decision," Bill replied, not meeting my eyes. "Too much invested to pull out now. Besides, as long as we follow the protocols, maintain the, I guess you'd call it a relationship, with what's down there, incidents are minimal." Minimal? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Those were people, Bill. They had families. Which is why the night shift protocols exist," Dr. Mouton cut in. "Each rule addresses a specific behavior we've observed. The knocking, for instance, it's a form of communication. Answer correctly, provide the water offering, and it remains not friendly, but at least not actively hostile. And if we don't answer, the pressure builds. If ignored long enough, support structures begin to fail, as if something massive is pressing against them from below." A sudden realization hit me. The temperature drops in the drill shaft. It's approaching the surface. Dr. Mouton nodded. Coming up to investigate, the emergency shutdown and evacuation gives it time to retreat. My head spun with the implications. Why me? Why am I here if this is so dangerous? Bill at least had the decency to look ashamed. Ramon's been doing this for months. The stress, he's not sick with food poisoning. He had a breakdown. Started talking about taking a boat out to one of the abandoned platforms nearby. Said they were calling him home. We needed someone experienced, Dr. Mouton added. Someone who knows these waters, understands the industry, someone who could handle the pressure. And if I decide to walk away, that's your right, Bill said. But the company's offering triple pay for night shift supervisors now, $300,000 for a 6-month rotation. The figure hung in the air between us. With that kind of money, I could pay off my debts, set up a college fund for my daughter, maybe even buy back the family home in Morgan City that I had lost in the divorce. Before I could respond, an alarm blared from one of the monitors. Dr. Mouton swiveled back to the screens. Movement, he said tersely. Something's rising from the depths. The sonar display showed a massive shape ascending toward the platform, moving with deliberate purpose. Depth, Bill demanded. 500 meters and climbing fast. Initiate Protocol Omega, Bill ordered. Now. Dr. Mouton's fingers flew across the keyboard. Red warning lights began flashing throughout the room. What's Protocol Omega? I asked, my heart pounding. Emergency drilling halt and full sensor blackout, Bill explained as Dr. Mouton worked. Makes us invisible to it and usually works. Usually? The doctor interrupted before Bill could answer. It's stopping. Hovering at 300 meters. We watched in tense silence as the massive shape on the sonar paused its ascent. After what felt like an eternity, it began to sink slowly back into the abyss. Bill let out a breath I hadn't realized he was holding. Crisis averted. For now. This happens often? I asked. More frequently lately, Dr. Mouton admitted. It's becoming more active, more aware of our presence. The protocols are working less reliably each week. Which means what exactly? Bill placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. It means we need you, Marcus. Need your experience, your local knowledge. Because you think whatever's down there is going to break through? It wasn't a question, but Bill answered anyway. Yes, and when it does, we need to be ready. I didn't sleep after my first night shift. How could I? Each time I closed my eyes, I saw that massive shape rising on the sonar. Dr. Mouton's grim face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. The transformed workers clinging to the underside of the platform like barnacles, human barnacles with milky eyes. Instead, I paced my small cabin, Ramon's list of rules clutched in my hand, reading them over and over until I had them memorized. By the time the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, I had made my decision. The money was too good to walk away. And if something was stirring beneath the gulf, something ancient and dangerous that could turn men into monsters, someone needed to be here who gave a damn about the people on this rig. At 5:40 p.m., I made my way to the mess hall. The day shift workers were finishing their meals, the atmosphere surprisingly normal. Jokes about the Saints' chances this season, complaints about the gumbo not being as good as someone's grandma made it. Did they know what was happening beneath them? The night crew sat at a separate table, quieter, exchanging significant glances. My crew now. I filled my tray and joined them. 5 men, all veterans of offshore drilling. Jenkins from drill control, Washburn, the heavyset mechanic, Lee, our electronic specialist, Cooper, young but experienced, handled the robotic submersibles, and Santiago, former Navy, now our safety officer. All of them had been on DH-6 for at least 6 months. All of them knew the rules. So, I said once I'd settled in, who's going to tell me what we're really dealing with down there? Silence fell over the table. The men exchanged glances again. Finally, Santiago spoke, his voice low. You've seen Mouton's data. I nodded. Data doesn't tell the whole story. He pushed his half-eaten meal away. You know the Mississippi River dumps millions of tons of sediment into the Gulf every year, right? Builds up the seafloor, especially in this part of the basin. Sure, I said. Basic geology. 3 months ago, we drilled past what should have been bedrock. Instead, we hit something organic, something that bled. Bled? My appetite vanished instantly. Jenkins leaned forward. Black fluid, thick as molasses, smelled like rotting meat and crude oil mixed together, damn near evacuated the rig from the stench alone. That's when it started, Washburn added. The knocking, the temperature fluctuations, the voices on the radio. And the workers who changed, I prompted. Cooper, the youngest, shuddered visibly. Harkins was my friend. We played poker every Saturday. When he started changing, he told me he could hear singing coming from beneath the water. Said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. 3 days later, Lee continued, his skin started sloughing off in the shower. Not bleeding, just peeling away in strips. Underneath was this gray, rubbery stuff, like shark skin, but wrong somehow. He wasn't scared, Cooper said, his voice hollow. That was the worst part. He smiled the whole time, said he was becoming perfect, said soon we'd all understand. A chill ran through me despite the hall's warmth. And the company knows all this? They're still making us drill? Santiago's laugh was bitter. Welcome to corporate America, boss. They think whatever's down there might be more valuable than oil. Some kind of biological discovery. Pharmaceutical potential, they said. That's insane, I muttered. People are dying. Worse than dying, Jenkins said firmly, which is why we follow the rules. They work, mostly. Keep it pacified. Tell him about Gidry, Cooper said suddenly. The table fell silent again. Jenkins shot Cooper a warning look. I need to know everything, I insisted. No holding back. Santiago sighed. Antoine Gidry, local guy from Cocodrie, started having dreams about a month after we breached the membrane. Said he could see underwater in these dreams, moving through the Gulf without scuba gear. Something was guiding him. What kind of things? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Old things. Shipwrecks no one's discovered, ruins under the silt that shouldn't exist this far west in the Gulf, and other platforms, abandoned ones from the 80s oil bust. Santiago's eyes met mine. Platforms where he said the changed ones were gathering. The cold weight settled in my stomach. He went looking for them, didn't he? Jenkins nodded grimly. Stole one of the lifeboats during the shift change. Coast Guard found the boat 3 days later, drifting empty near an abandoned platform about 15 miles southwest of here. Platform was barricaded shut. Chain wrapped around the access ladder. Chain looked fresh. You think the changed workers did it? I asked. We think Gidry found what he was looking for, Lee said quietly, and something made sure he couldn't come back to tell us about it. The intercom crackled to life, saving me from having to respond. Night shift personnel, report to stations. Repeat. Night shift personnel, report to stations. As the others gathered their trays, Washburn placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. One more thing you should know, boss. Boss. The rules, they keep changing. What worked last week might not work tonight. It's learning, he added, his expression dead serious. Adapting. Testing our limits. Wonderful, I muttered. Any other good news? Yeah, he said. Don't go out on the platform alone after midnight, no matter what you hear or see. With that ominous warning, we made our way to our stations. The day shift workers looked relieved to be leaving, practically running to the helicopter pad. By 7 p.m., the night crew had taken full control of the platform, and the true isolation of our situation settled over me like a shroud. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I checked in with each station, reviewed drilling data, and monitored the special sensors Dr. Mouton had installed. Everything normal, or as normal as things could be when you're drilling into something ancient and alive beneath the Gulf of Mexico. At 10:42 p.m., I was in the supervisor's office reviewing seismic logs when the first incident occurred. The lights flickered briefly and the temperature dropped noticeably. I checked the environmental controls, functioning normally. Then my radio crackled. Supervisor, came Lee's voice, tight with tension. East side camera 3 is showing something in the water. I switched my monitor to the camera feed. At first I saw nothing but the dark waters of the Gulf reflecting the platform's lights. Then I noticed movement, ripples spreading in concentric circles from a central point about 50 yards from the platform. Something was rising. Rule 4, I muttered to myself, reaching for the protocols. Any crew member who reports seeing lights beneath the water is to be immediately relieved of duty and confined to quarters until morning shift. But these weren't lights, just movement. The radio crackled again. Marcus Lee's voice had dropped to a whisper. It's glowing now. I looked back at the monitor. He was right. A faint blue-green phosphorescence had appeared where the ripples originated, growing brighter as whatever was causing it rose closer to the surface. Rule 4 didn't specify glowing, just lights. Close enough. Lee, you're relieved. Go to your quarters and stay there until morning. But, now Lee, that's an order. I heard him swear in Mandarin, then, yes, sir. Lee out. I switched to the general channel. All personnel, we have an incident on the east side. Follow Rule 1 immediately. I repeat, implement Rule 1. Within minutes, the eastern side of the platform went dark as the external lights were shut down. I kept my eyes fixed on the monitor, watching as the glow beneath the water grew brighter, then began to move, circling the platform like a massive, luminous shark. The radio came to life again, this time with Jenkins's voice. Supervisor to drill control ASAP peep. I hurried through the corridors, the emergency lighting casting eerie shadows. Jenkins was standing at the main console, his face illuminated by the glow of the instruments. Temperature in the shaft is dropping, he said without preamble. 8 degrees and falling. Rule 2. If the temperature in the drill shaft drops below 36 degrees Fahrenheit, immediately initiate emergency shutdown sequence 5C and evacuate all personnel from the lower deck. How fast is it falling? About a degree every 30 seconds. At this rate, we'll hit 36 in 1 minute, I finished for him. Start the shutdown sequence. I'll order the evacuation. Jenkins nodded and began typing commands into the system. I grabbed the PA microphone. Attention all personnel. This is Supervisor Thibodeau. Initiate emergency procedure 5C. All lower deck personnel evacuate immediately. Repeat. All lower deck personnel evacuate immediately. Alarms blared throughout the platform as the shutdown sequence began. I could hear the heavy thud of the watertight doors closing, automatically sealing off sections of the rig. 36.5 and still dropping, Jenkins reported, his eyes fixed on the gauge. Then, without warning, every light on the platform went out. The emergency generators should have kicked in immediately, but they didn't. We were plunged into absolute darkness. Jenkins, I called out. Still here, came his reply, surprisingly steady. Don't move. Don't make any loud noises. The generators. It's not a malfunction, he cut me off, his voice barely above a whisper. This has happened before. It's listening. Listening for what? Before he could answer, a sound echoed through the darkness, a wet, sliding noise coming from the direction of the drill shaft. Then another sound, one that turned my blood to ice. Footsteps. Slow and uneven, accompanied by a rhythmic dripping. Something was on the platform. Something that had come up from below. Through the darkness, I heard Jenkins whisper, "It's broken Rule 2. In the pitch black of the control room, I froze, barely breathing. The footsteps drew closer, a shuffling, dragging sound, followed by that unsettling drip. The air temperature had plummeted. Each breath came out as a visible plume in the faint glow of the few emergency indicators still functioning. Then came a sound I'll never forget, a wet, gurgling intake of breath, as if someone were trying to breathe through fluid-filled lungs. "Jenkins," I whispered. "What do we do?" His reply was so quiet I almost missed it. Rule 7, ask the question. Rule 7, if you see a crew member you don't recognize, or if a known crew member appears disoriented or unusual, ask them, "How's the weather in Huma?" The correct response is wet this time of year. Any other response requires immediate containment in the panic room. The footsteps stopped just outside the control room door. A hand slapped wetly against the metal, then began to turn the handle. My throat constricted with fear, but I forced the words out. "How's the weather in Huma?" The door opened slowly, revealing a silhouette backlit by the faint red glow of a distant emergency light. Water pooled around its feet, spreading across the floor in dark tendrils. "Cold," came the reply, the voice garbled and distorted like someone speaking underwater. "So, cold in the deep, deep." "Wrong answer." I felt Jenkins tense beside me. Like the figure took a shambling step into the room. In the dim red light, I could make out features that were almost human, but wrong. Skin glistening with moisture, hanging loosely in places as if partially dissolved. Its eyes reflected the light like a cat's or a deep-sea creature's. "Harkins," Jenkins breathed. Recognition and horror mingled in his voice. The figure's head snapped toward Jenkins, those reflective eyes fixing on him. "Jenkins," it gurgled. "Come with us. Be beautiful down there. We're evolving, becoming perfect." I backed away slowly, groping behind me for anything that could be used as a weapon. My hand closed around a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. "The panic room," Jenkins hissed at me. Harkins, or the thing that had once been Harkins, lunged forward with unexpected speed. Jenkins cried out as the creature seized him, wet hands closing around his throat. I swung the fire extinguisher with all my strength, connecting with the side of the thing's head. There was a sickening squelching sound, but Harkins didn't release Jenkins. Instead, it turned those reflective eyes toward me, mouth opening impossibly wide to reveal rows of needle-like teeth that no human should possess. I squeezed the extinguisher's trigger, blasting the creature full in the face with chemical foam. It reeled backward, making a high-pitched keening sound, hands releasing Jenkins to claw at its eyes. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Jenkins by the arm. We sprinted through the corridor, the creature's inhuman wails echoing behind us. The panic room was on the upper deck, designed as a secure shelter during hurricane evacuations. If we could reach it, we'd be safe, at least temporarily. As we ran, emergency lights began flickering back on, casting the corridors in a stuttering, disorienting glow. We rounded a corner and nearly collided with Santiago and Washburn, both armed with makeshift weapons, a wrench and a length of pipe. "Something's on the platform," I gasped. "We know," Santiago said grimly. "Cooper spotted Guidry on the southwest corner, or what used to be Guidry." "There are two of them?" Jenkins asked, his voice cracking. "At least," Washburn confirmed. "We're gathering everyone at the panic room." Before any of us could move, the PA system crackled to life, broadcasting a series of wet clicking sounds followed by words in Cajun French, the same phrase repeated over and over in a chorus of distorted voices. "Laissez-nous entrer, nous sommes femmes." "What are they saying?" Washburn demanded. My grandmother's voice seemed to echo in my head, teaching me the language of our ancestors. "Let us in. We are hungry." The lights flickered again, and in the momentary darkness, something moved at the end of the hallway, a silhouette of wrong proportions, water streaming from its elongated limbs. "Move," Santiago shouted, and we raced toward the stairwell leading to the upper deck. Behind us, multiple sets of wet, slapping footsteps pursued. The sound of dripping water grew louder, as if a pipe had burst. The air grew colder with each step. We burst through the stairwell door onto the upper deck. The night air hit us like a physical force, warm and thick with Gulf humidity after the unnatural cold below. Ahead, the panic room's reinforced forced door stood open, Cooper waving frantically from inside. "Hurry!" he shouted. "We can't hold it much longer." We sprinted the final distance, diving through the doorway just as Cooper and Lee began to push it closed. Through the narrowing gap, I caught a glimpse of gray, glistening figures emerging from the stairwell. 3, 4, 5 of them, moving with that same uneven gait. The door sealed with a hydraulic hiss, locking mechanisms engaging automatically. We collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. "Did you see them?" Lee asked, his face pale with shock. "Their eyes." "Where's Dr. Mutang?" I interrupted, noticing the oceanographer's absence. "Monitoring station," Cooper said, shaking his head. "He refused to leave his equipment." "And Bill helicoptered out this afternoon," Santiago said bitterly. "Convenient timing." I looked around the panic room. 6 of us had made it, me, Jenkins, Santiago, Washburn, Cooper, and Lee. The room was designed to sustain a full crew during hurricane evacuations with food, water, medical supplies, and an independent power source. What about the rest of the night crew? I asked. Silence fell. Then Santiago spoke, his voice hollow. We're it, boss. The rest we heard screaming from the lower deck after the power went out. By the time we got there, he didn't need to finish. I slumped against the wall, the reality of our situation settling like a stone in my gut. We were trapped on a platform 70 miles from shore, surrounded by transformed crew members who had once been our colleagues, with something ancient and hungry stirring in the depths below. The protocols failed, Jenkins said, voicing what we were all thinking. It's learning. Adapting. What do they want? Cooper asked, his young face lined with fear. To feed, came Lee's quiet reply. Or to transform us, make us like them. A heavy thud sounded against the panic room door, then another. The creatures outside were trying to get in. Will this hold? I asked, eyeing the reinforced door. It's designed to withstand hurricane-force winds, Santiago answered. But those things, they're strong and determined. Another impact, harder this time. The door shuttered but held. We need to call for help, Washburn said, moving to the communications panel. Mayday to the Coast Guard? And tell them what? Jenkins demanded. That we're being attacked by fish zombie former colleagues? They'll think it's a prank. Tell them there's been a catastrophic failure, I suggested. Platform instability. Request immediate evacuation. Washburn nodded and began transmitting the distress call. I turned to the security monitors, flipping through camera feeds to assess our situation. What I saw chilled me to the bone. At least a dozen transformed crew members shambled across the platform, more emerging from the water with each passing minute. They moved with purpose, securing locations, disabling equipment. This wasn't mindless aggression. It was coordinated, strategic. And at the drilling controls, a figure that had once been Dr. Mutin worked methodically, overriding safety protocols, restarting the drill. Free what? Cooper asked. I pointed to the seismic monitor in the corner of the panic room, still receiving data from Mutan's equipment. The massive shape we'd seen earlier was rising again, this time with nothing to stop its ascent. Whatever's down there, I said. Whatever changed them, I think it's finally coming up. The panic room fell silent as we watched the monitors. On one screen, transformed crew members. I couldn't bring myself to call them zombies, though the term hovered at the edge of my thoughts, continued their assault on the door, taking turns ramming against it with inhuman strength. On another, the thing that had been Dr. Mutin worked at the drilling controls, movements jerky but precise. No response from the Coast Guard, Washburn reported, setting down the radio handset. Too much interference. Something's blocking the signal. Santiago cursed under his breath. Helicopter won't come until scheduled pickup at 0600. That's 7 hours away. We won't last 7 hours, Jenkins said, voicing what we were all thinking. Not with what's happening out there. I turned to the seismic monitor again. The massive shape continued its steady ascent, now just 200 meters below the platform. Whatever it was the size of a small office building and moving with deliberate purpose. We need to stop the drilling, I decided. If they're trying to free that thing, we need to shut it down. How? How? Cooper demanded, gesturing at the screens. We're trapped in here, and those things are out there. The emergency shutdown, Lee suggested. There's a manual override in the main control room that cuts all power to the drilling equipment, completely kills the systems from the ground up, which would trap whatever that is back down in the deep. I nodded, but someone would have to get to the control room. A heavy silence fell over the group. The control room was on the main deck, and we'd have to navigate past multiple transformed crew members to reach it. I'll go, Santiago said finally. Former Navy SEAL, I've got the best chance. Not alone, I replied. I'm the supervisor. I know the override codes. Jenkins shook his head. Too risky. We need another option. There isn't one, I insisted. Look at the monitors. That thing is getting closer every minute. Once it reaches the surface, I don't want to find out what happens then. As if to punctuate my words, the entire platform shuddered violently, metal groaning under sudden stress. The monitors showed waves rippling outward from beneath the rig as something massive displaced the water below. Okay, Jenkins relented, but not just the two of you. We all go. Safety in numbers. I considered this. 4 of us go, the rest stay here, maintain communication, be ready to let us back in. We quickly formed a plan. Santiago, Lee, Jenkins, and I would make the attempt, while Cooper and Washburn remained in the panic room, monitoring our progress through the security cameras and coordinating our movements. We armed ourselves with whatever could serve as weapons: fire extinguishers, wrenches, a flare gun with 3 flares. Remember, I told the others as we prepared to leave, these were our colleagues, our friends, but whatever's inside them now isn't human. Don't hesitate if they come at you. Santiago checked the small window in the panic room door. Momentarily clear. They're regrouping at the drill controls. Now's our chance. With a final nod to Cooper and Washburn, we unsealed the door and slipped out onto the deck. The night air hung heavy with Gulf moisture, unusually still. The platform's lights cast harsh shadows across the metal walkways. In the distance, I could hear the unnatural chorus of transformed workers, their voices blending in that same repeating phrase, "Le nouveau entré, le nouveau homme." We moved in formation, Santiago taking point, Lee and Jenkins in the middle, me bringing up the rear. Every few yards, Santiago would signal a halt, check around corners, then wave us forward. The platform felt alien now, hostile. The familiar walkways and equipment turned sinister in the half-light. Movement at 2, Santiago whispered, gesturing toward a cluster of equipment. 2 of them. Through the shadows, I could make out a pair of figures huddled over something on the deck. The remains of a crew member, I realized with horror. They weren't eating it exactly, but seemed to be changing it, their hands working methodically over the corpse. As we watched, the dead man's chest heaved and milky eyes snapped open. "They're converting the dead," Lee breathed. "Making more of themselves." Alternative route, Santiago decided, leading us down a maintenance ladder to a lower level. The detour cost us precious minutes. By the time we reached the central junction that would lead to the control room, Cooper's voice crackled over our handheld radios. "You've got company," he warned. 3 coming up behind you, 2 more approaching from the helipad direction. "Trapped," Jenkins hissed. "Options?" I asked Santiago. He scanned our surroundings, eyes landing on a narrow utility passage. "Through there. It'll be tight, but they might not follow." We squeezed into the passage, a claustrophobic tunnel of pipes and electrical conduits. The metal was slick with condensation, making our progress slow and treacherous. Behind us, I could hear the wet slap of transformed workers' feet on the deck, drawing closer. "They're at the passage entrance," Cooper's voice came again. "But they're too altered to fit. Buying you some time." We emerged on the other side, now just 1 level below the control room. A maintenance ladder would take us directly up. "Almost there," I encouraged the others, trying to ignore the way the platform had begun to vibrate continuously beneath our feet. Santiago went up the ladder first, then Jenkins followed, with me bringing up the rear. As I placed my foot on the first rung, a cold, wet hand closed around my ankle. I looked down into what had once been Harkins's face, now a grotesque mask of glistening gray flesh and 2 sharp teeth. Those reflective eyes fixed on mine as it pulled, trying to drag me down. "Marcus!" Jenkins shouted from above. I kicked frantically, my work boot connecting with the thing's face. It didn't flinch, didn't react to pain as a human would. Instead, it opened its mouth and bit down hard on my boot. I felt those needle teeth puncture the leather, just grazing my skin. With a desperate surge of strength born of pure terror, I kicked again, this time knocking the creature backward. It lost its grip, tumbling onto the deck below. I scrambled up the ladder, heart thundering in my chest. Santiago helped pull me onto the upper level, quickly checking me over. "Did it get you?" he demanded. "Just my boot," I assured him, though the spot where those teeth had grazed my skin burned like ice. We were now on the same level as the control room, just 30 yards of open deck between us and our goal. But the way wasn't clear. 4 transformed workers blocked the path, including the thing that had once been Dr. Mutin. "Cooper," I whispered into the radio. "Status on the drilling?" Bad, came the tense reply. Whatever Dr. Mutin did, it's accelerated the process. They've overridden all the safety protocols, drills going at maximum speed, and the entity 100 meters and rising fast, platform stability at 60% and dropping. As if to confirm his words, a violent shudder ran through the rig, nearly knocking us off our feet. In the distance, I heard the screech of tearing metal. "We're out of time," Santiago said grimly. "Direct approach. I'll draw them off. You three get to the control room." Before any of us could protest, he stepped out into the open, raised the flare gun, and fired. The flare streaked across the deck, exploding in a burst of red light that illuminated the nightmarish scene in stark relief. The transformed workers turned as one, heads swiveling unnaturally toward the source of the light. Santiago was already running, leading them away from our position, his footsteps ringing on the metal decking. "Now," Jenkins urged, and we sprinted toward the control room. We were halfway there when the platform heaved violently, throwing us to the deck. A deafening roar filled the air, not mechanical but organic, the sound of something vast and ancient giving voice to its rage or hunger. I looked up to see a massive shape breach the surface beside the platform, a glistening mountain of flesh rising from the gulf. In the platform's lights, I caught glimpses of features that defied comprehension. Ridges of armored skin, great pits that might have been sensory organs, a mouth large enough to swallow a helicopter. "My God," Lee whispered beside me. The control room was just ahead. We scrambled to our feet, racing the final distance as the platform continued to heave and groan beneath us. Inside, the control room was a scene of chaos. Monitors flashed with warnings, alarms blared from multiple stations. The main drilling controls had been physically altered, critical safety mechanisms disabled or bypassed. "Jenkins, secure the door," I ordered, moving to the emergency shutdown panel. It had been tampered with. The protective casing pried open, wires exposed. "Lee, can you fix this?" I asked, stepping aside. Lee examined the damage, his expression grave. "Partially. I can't trigger a full shutdown, but I might be able to initiate a pressure release in the drill shaft. It would slow things down, maybe push that thing back." "Do it," I said, then turned to Jenkins. "Get Santiago on the radio. Tell him to get back to the panic room." Jenkins tried the radio, receiving only static in response. "He's not answering." Another violent tremor shook the platform, strong enough to crack one of the reinforced windows. Through the spiderwebbed glass, I saw the entity continue to rise. Massive tentacular structures now visible, wrapping around the platform's support legs. "Got it," Lee announced, his fingers dancing over the exposed wiring. Initiating pressure release in 3, 2, 1. A series of explosions echoed from below as emergency valves blew open, releasing the immense pressure in the drill shaft. The platform lurched sickeningly, listing to one side as the entity reacted to the sudden change. "Did it work?" Jenkins asked, bracing himself against a console. On the monitors, the seismic readings showed the massive shape hesitating. Its ascent momentarily halted by the pressure release, but it wasn't retreating. "It's adapting," Lee said, pointing to the readings. "The pressure release is only buying us time." The radio crackled to life, Cooper's panicked voice breaking through. "Whatever you did bought us a few minutes, but the platform's integrity is failing. Support struts are buckling. We have maybe 20 minutes before structural collapse. 20 minutes, not enough time for the helicopter, even if we could somehow contact it. The lifeboats, I decided. It's our only chance." "The transformed workers are all over the launch areas," Jenkins pointed out. "Then we fight our way through," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Get everyone from the panic room to the southeast lifeboat station. It's the furthest from where that thing is rising." As we gathered to leave the control room, Lee suddenly grabbed my arm, pointing to one of the security feeds on the screen. Santiago was cornered on the helipad, surrounded by transformed workers. He fought valiantly, keeping them at bay with a length of pipe, but there were too many. As we watched in horror, they overwhelmed him, dragging him to the edge of the platform. What happened next would haunt my nightmares forever. Rather than killing him, they forced him over the side, not into the gulf, but directly into a pulsating appendage of the entity that had risen alongside the platform. Santiago struggled briefly, then went rigid as he was absorbed into the glistening flesh. "Jesus Christ," Jenkins breathed. "We have to move," I said, tearing my eyes from the screen. Now, as we turned to leave, a wet, strangled voice came from the doorway. "No one's going anywhere." Dr. Mouton stood there, or what remained of him, flanked by 3 other transformed workers. His skin hung in loose gray folds, those same reflective eyes fixed on us with predatory intensity. "The Nox Cheeto rises," he gurgled, water spilling from his mouth with each word. "You will be part of its awakening, all of you." Behind him, more shapes appeared in the corridor, blocking our escape. We were trapped. "How's the weather in Huma?" I asked, desperately clinging to Rule 7, even as I knew it was useless. These things had evolved beyond our protocols. The transformed Mouton tilted his head at an unnatural angle, milky eyes narrowing. "The weather above is perfect for rebirth," he gurgled, water spilling down his chin. "You will all see, soon." The platform shuddered again, metal screaming under impossible strain. The entity outside was still rising, tightening its grip on the support structures. "We need a distraction," Jenkins whispered beside me. Lee's eyes darted around the control room, landing on the fire suppression system. "I have an idea," he murmured. "Be ready to move." Before I could ask what he planned, Lee lunged for the emergency panel and slammed his fist against the halon fire suppression button. Klaxons blared as the system engaged, flooding the control room and adjacent corridors with dense, choking gas. The transformed workers reacted immediately, writhing and emitting high-pitched keening sounds as the halon hit their waterlogged tissues. In the confusion, Jenkins shoved past them, creating an opening. "Run!" he shouted. We burst through the gap, racing down the corridor toward the panic room. Behind us, the inhuman shrieks of the transformed crew echoed off metal walls, punctuated by the platform's continuing structural protests. "Cooper!" I shouted into my radio as we ran. "We're coming in hot. 4 transformed crew on our tail." "Copy that," came the tense reply. "Doors ready to open on your signal." We rounded the final corner, the panic room door just 30 yards ahead. But halfway there, the deck beneath us buckled violently, metal plating tearing open to reveal the black water below. Jenkins, leading our group, barely managed to leap across the widening gap. Lee wasn't so lucky. His foot slipped on the edge, and he fell, barely catching himself on a jagged piece of torn decking. "Lee!" I shouted, dropping to my stomach at the edge, extending my hand. Behind us, the wet slapping of the transformed workers' feet grew louder. Lee looked up at me, then past me to the approaching threat. Something shifted in his expression, resignation, perhaps, or resolve. "Get to the lifeboat," he said quietly. "I'll hold them off." "No, take my hand." He shook his head, already pulling himself up onto the opposite side of the gap from us, the side where the transformed workers were approaching. "Someone has to slow them down," he said, drawing himself up to face the oncoming threat. "Go." Jenkins grabbed my shoulder. "He's right. We have to move." With a final, agonized look at Lee, who now stood with his back to us, facing the approaching horde, I turned and followed Jenkins toward the panic room. The door hissed open as we approached, Cooper and Washburn pulling us inside before slamming it shut again. "Where's Lee?" Cooper demanded, his young face pale with fear. Through the small window in the door, I watched as Lee met the transformed workers head-on, fighting with desperate courage. They overwhelmed him quickly, but his sacrifice bought us precious minutes. "He didn't make it," I said, the words hollow in my mouth. "Santiago?" Washburn asked. Jenkins shook his head. "Gone, taken by that thing outside." The monitors in the panic room told the story clearly. The platform was failing, structural integrity down to critical levels. The massive entity continued to rise, now fully breached, its incomprehensible bulk pressing against the rig's support structures. "The lifeboats," I said, forcing focus through the grief and horror. "It's our only chance. Southeast Station." "Not possible," Cooper replied, pulling up a camera feed. "Look." The The lifeboat stations were overrun with transformed workers, dozens of them, more than we'd realized existed, all moving with that same unnatural coordination. Some were crew I recognized. Others must have come from elsewhere, perhaps other platforms that had already fallen. "They're guarding every escape route," Washburn observed. "Why not just kill us?" Cooper asked, his voice rising with panic. "Why trap us?" A terrible realization dawned on me. "Because they need us alive, for conversion." Jenkins frowned. "What do you mean?" "Remember what happened to Santiago? They didn't kill him. They fed him to that thing. And now look." I pointed to the monitor showing the helipad where Santiago had been taken. A new figure had emerged from the water, shambling onto the platform. But this one moved differently, more smoothly than the other changed workers. As it stepped into the light, I recognized Santiago's features, transformed, but more perfect than the others. His skin wasn't hanging in strips, but had a smooth gray sheen. His movements were fluid, purposeful. "It's evolving," I whispered, "using Santiago as a template to create something better." "So what's the plan?" Washburn demanded. "We can't stay here. The platform's breaking apart. We can't reach the lifeboats. What options do we have?" An idea formed in my mind, desperate, probably suicidal, but better than waiting to be converted. "The diving equipment," I said, "in the underwater maintenance bay. If we can reach it, maybe we can swim away from the platform, far enough to avoid both the transformed workers and the collapse." "Swim," Cooper echoed incredulously. "In the Gulf? At night? With that thing out there?" "You got a better idea?" I challenged. Silence was my answer. The underwater maintenance bay was located on the lowest accessible level, equipped with diving gear for emergency repairs to the platform's submerged structures. If we could reach it, we might have a chance, slim but better than none. "How do we get there?" Jenkins asked. "The transformed workers are everywhere." I studied the platform schematics on one of the monitors. "Maintenance shafts," I decided, tracing a route with my finger. "Tight spaces. They'd have trouble navigating with their altered forms. We can access them 3 levels down, then work our way to the bay." The platform shuddered again, a deep structural groan that seemed to come from its very foundations. "Cooper," I turned to the youngest member of our group, "how long until complete structural failure?" He consulted the readouts, face grim. 15 minutes. Maybe less. No time to waste. We gathered what supplies we could: flashlights, a first aid kit, a toolbox that might provide improvised weapons. I checked the security feeds one last time, plotting our route. "Ready?" I asked, looking at each man in turn. Washburn nodded grimly. Jenkins set his jaw, determination hardening his features. Cooper looked terrified, but gave me a shaky thumbs up. I unsealed the panic room door, and we slipped into the corridor beyond. The platform's dying groans masked our footsteps as we made our way toward the access hatch that would lead us to the maintenance shafts. The first obstacle came at the central junction. 2 transformed workers blocking our path, their backs to us as they worked on something I couldn't quite see. I signaled the others to wait, then raised the wrench I brought from the panic room. What happened next occurred so quickly I barely had time to register it. One moment I was preparing to ambush the transformed workers. The next, they both turned, simultaneously, as if sensing our presence. But instead of attacking, they stiffened, heads tilting to listen to something I couldn't hear. Then, ignoring us completely, they shambled away toward the eastern side of the platform. "What the hell?" Washburn breathed. "Don't question it," Jenkins urged. "Move." We hurried past the now empty junction, reaching the access hatch without further incident. Cooper spun the wheel, and the hatch swung open to reveal the narrow maintenance shaft below. "I'll go first," I said, lowering myself into the opening. "Cooper last. Close the hatch behind you." The shaft was claustrophobic, barely wide enough for a man's shoulders, descending vertically for about 20 feet before opening onto a horizontal passage. The air was stale, thick with the smell of machine oil and rust. One by one, we descended, Cooper sealing the hatch above us. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing a maze of pipes and conduits running alongside the narrow crawl space we now occupied. This way, I whispered, orienting myself using the mental map I'd formed from the platform schematics. We crawled in silence, the platform's continuing deterioration evident in the way the metal around us groaned and shifted. Twice, we had to detour around collapsed sections, adding precious minutes to our journey. Finally, we reached the access point that would lead us to the underwater maintenance bay. I pressed my ear against the hatch, listening for any sound of transformed workers beyond. "Seems clear," I murmured, then slowly turned the wheel. The hatch opened onto a large, dimly lit space filled with diving equipment, underwater tools, and a moon pool, an opening in the floor that provided direct access to the sea below. The bay appeared deserted. "We made it," Cooper whispered, relief evident in his voice. "Don't celebrate yet," Jenkins cautioned, moving to secure the hatch behind us. "We still need to." He never finished the sentence. A violent impact rocked the platform, throwing us all to the floor. The lights flickered, then died, plunging us into darkness, broken only by our flashlight beams. "What was that?" Washburn gasped. A second impact followed, more powerful than the first. Through the floor, I felt rather than heard a deep, resonant call, like whale song but lower, more ancient, vibrating through the very structure of the platform. The entity was calling. And then, from every direction at once, came the answering call of the transformed workers. That same phrase chanted in unison through waterlogged vocal cords, "Listen to Entrée Nouveau FMA." "They're coming," I realized aloud. "All of them. Here." "Why?" Cooper asked frantically, pulling diving equipment from storage racks. The answer came to me with terrible clarity. "The moon pool. It's the closest access point to the entity. They're gathering to... I don't know. Join with it. Feed it. Whatever they're planning, we're in their way." Jenkins threw me a diving suit. "Then let's not be here when they arrive." We worked with desperate speed, donning the suits over our clothes. They were commercial diving rigs, heavy but self-contained with their own air supply. I had just sealed my helmet when the first transformed worker burst through the far door, the new, evolved version of Santiago, moving with predatory grace. "Hurry!" I shouted through the suit's communication system. Washburn, closest to the moon pool, was the first to enter the water, disappearing into the dark gulf. Cooper followed, then Jenkins. I was last, 1 foot on the ledge, when Santiago's transformed hand closed around my air hose. The abandoned platform Jenkins had mentioned gradually took shape in the distance, a skeletal structure rising from the seabed, dark and silent, its productive life long since ended by economics or disaster. As we approached, I could make out the rusted supports, the crumbling deck high above. "There," Jenkins called. "There's an emergency ladder on the southeast leg." We changed course slightly, heading for the massive support structure he'd indicated. Behind us, the transformed workers pursued relentlessly, their altered bodies perfectly adapted to underwater movement. Washburn reached the ladder first, grabbing the lowest rung and pulling himself up. Jenkins followed close behind. I lagged several yards back, every movement now a supreme effort of will against my failing body. As Washburn climbed higher, something shot from the darkness of the platform's understructure, a pale, elongated arm ending in webbed fingers with vicious claws. It seized Washburn around the waist, yanking him from the ladder. "No!" Jenkins shouted, reaching for him but missing by inches. Washburn's scream filled the comm system as he was dragged into the darkness beneath the abandoned platform. His dive lights spun wildly, illuminating glimpses of multiple figures, transformed workers who had claimed this structure as their own. "It's a trap," I gasped into the comm. "The platform. They're already here." Jenkins hesitated on the ladder, looking back at me, then up at the dark platform, then to the open water where Washburn had vanished. "We have to keep moving," he said finally. "Up is our only chance now." He was right. With transformed workers in the water behind us and more waiting in the darkness below the platform, our only hope was to climb above the waterline, where perhaps they'd be less agile, less adapted. I reached the ladder at last, my arms feeling like lead as I grabbed the lowest rung. Jenkins was already 20 feet up, climbing steadily toward the surface. I followed, each step an agony of effort. As I climbed, the cold numbness continued to spread through my body. My vision was changing, too, the darkness becoming less absolute, shapes more distinct in the gloom. I could sense the transformed workers circling below, waiting, watching. I could feel their anticipation, their hunger. Worse, I was beginning to understand it. "Jenkins," I called, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "I'm not going to make it." He paused in his climbing, looking down at me. Even through his dive helmet, I could see the realization dawn on his face. "You're changing," he said. "Not a question, since the control room." Harkins bit through my boot. Jenkins was silent for a long moment. "How long do you have?" "Not long. I can feel it. It's in my head now." Whispering. Another silence. Then, "What's it saying?" I listened to the voice that had been growing steadily louder in my mind. Ancient, hungry, patient. It's saying this was always going to happen, that we woke something that should have stayed sleeping, that we're food and vessels, both. "Keep climbing," Jenkins urged. "Fight it." I continued upward, though each rung was harder than the last. We passed the waterline, the gulf falling away beneath us as we ascended the massive support leg. The abandoned platform loomed above, dark against the night sky. My arms seized suddenly, muscles locking as a spasm ran through my body. I clung to the ladder, fighting to maintain my grip as something shifted inside me, bones grinding as they began to change configuration. "Jenkins," I gasped. "I'm out of time." He had climbed a few yards ahead but stopped again, looking down at me. After a moment's hesitation, he descended until we were face to face on the ladder. "I'm sorry, Marcus," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Not your fault." Another spasm rocked my body, stronger this time. I could feel my skin loosening, preparing to slough away. "You need to go. Get as far from here as you can. And then what? There's no escape from this. You saw what happened at the rig. This thing, whatever it is, it's fully awake now, and spreading." He was right. The entity's emergence wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I thought of Morgan City, of Port Fourchon, of New Orleans, of my daughter. "There has to be a way to stop it," I said, fighting to keep my thoughts coherent as the whispering in my head grew louder. "To warn people." "I'll try," Jenkins promised, "if I make it off this platform alive." We both knew his chances were slim. The transformed workers would be waiting above, just as they had been below. Another convulsion hit me. This one strong enough that I nearly lost my grip on the ladder. Jenkins reached out to steady me, then drew back as he saw the changes beginning to manifest visibly, my diving gloves splitting as webbing formed between my fingers. "Go," I urged. "Now, before I can't. Before I try to stop you." Jenkins nodded once, his expression hidden behind his helmet visor. "Goodbye, Marcus. Goodbye, my friend." He resumed climbing, quickly disappearing into the darkness above. I clung to the ladder, feeling the transformation accelerate now that I had stopped fighting it. The cold had spread throughout my body, and with it came a strange new strength, a heightened awareness of the water below, of the currents and movements within it. The whispering in my head resolved into clear thoughts, not mine, but not entirely alien either. Images flashed through my mind. The entity rising fully from the gulf, its massive form moving toward the shore, transformed workers spreading out from oil platforms and fishing boats, coastal communities changing, adapting, evolving to serve the ancient thing from the deep. I understood now what it wanted, what it had always wanted since first being disturbed by our drills. Not just freedom, but dominion. The Gulf was just the beginning. With the last remnants of my humanity, I made a choice. I wouldn't be part of this. I wouldn't become a vessel for this invading consciousness. I released my grip on the ladder. The fall seemed to last forever, the wind rushing past my helmet as I plummeted toward the Gulf below. I hit the water hard, the impact driving what little air remained from my lungs as I sank into the darkness. I tore away my helmet, welcoming the rush of seawater. Better to die as Marcus Thibodeau than live as something else. As consciousness faded, I had one final, terrifying thought. I could still hear the whispering. Even in death, it wasn't letting me go. And somewhere far above, Jenkins climbed alone into darkness, carrying a warning no one would believe until it was too late. 3 weeks after the destruction of Deepwater Horizon 6, a shrimp boat discovered Thomas Jenkins clinging to a piece of driftwood 10 miles off the coast of Grand Isle. Severely dehydrated, suffering from exposure and exhaustion, he babbled incoherently about monsters in the Gulf and ancient things rising from the deep. The Coast Guard report classified the incident as a tragic industrial accident, with Jenkins as the sole survivor experiencing severe PTSD and delusions. Transocean Energy issued a press release blaming the platform's destruction on a catastrophic equipment failure, announcing generous compensation packages for the families of the deceased. The media covered it for a day or two before moving on to more pressing stories. The official death toll, 27 workers, including Marcus Thibodeau, night shift supervisor. I know all this because I read it in the Morgan City newspaper while sitting in a coffee shop on Front Street, watching the Atchafalaya River flow past on its journey to the Gulf. My name isn't important. What matters is that I used to work night security at Terrebonne General Medical, where they kept Jenkins under observation for 2 weeks before transferring him to a psychiatric facility in Baton Rouge. I was on duty the night he escaped. Found his room empty during my 3 a.m. rounds, the window broken from the inside. The security footage showed him moving with surprising strength and speed for a man who'd been bedridden for days, his movements strangely fluid, almost unnatural. 2 nights later, my cousin, who works for the Port Fourchon Harbor Police, called me in a panic. They'd found an abandoned boat drifting near an old oil platform. Inside was a waterlogged journal with Jenkins's name inside the cover, and a hastily scrawled note, "It's spreading. The rules don't work anymore. Stay away from the water." That was a month ago. Since then, there have been reports. Nothing official, just whispers among the fishing crews and offshore workers. Unusual fish catches with specimens showing strange deformities. Electronic equipment failing without explanation near certain areas of the Gulf. Most disturbing, a growing number of people gone missing from coastal communities. Cocodrie, Leeville, Cameron, Grand Isle, always the same pattern. They leave for a late-night fishing trip or a walk along an isolated stretch of beach. They don't return. Sometimes their boats are found drifting, empty. The authorities blame rip currents, or drug runners, or simple accidents. But those of us who've worked the Gulf for generations, we know better. Something has changed in these waters. You can feel it when you stand on the shore at night. A watchfulness, a hunger, a patient malevolence that wasn't there before. I'm leaving Louisiana tomorrow, heading inland as far as I can get. Before I go, I'm posting copies of this account, along with Jenkins' recovered journal, to every online forum I can find. Most will dismiss it as fiction, a creepypasta for late-night thrills. But maybe someone will recognize the truth. If you live near the Gulf Coast, I have one piece of advice. The rules that once protected us don't work anymore, but there's one rule that might save you. Stay away from the water, especially at night. Don't answer if you hear knocking on your hull or pier. Don't investigate strange lights beneath the surface. And if someone you know starts talking about beautiful singing coming from the Gulf or begins spending all their time staring out at the water, lock your doors. Because what woke up beneath Deepwater Horizon 6 is still out there, still hungry, still spreading. And Marcus Thibodeau, sometimes the shrimpers say they see a figure standing on the site where the platform went down, silhouetted against the moon, watching, waiting, warning, but nobody ever gets close enough to be sure. "5 months ago, I buried my wife in the hard, unforgiving soil of Harlan County. The coroner said it was a brain aneurysm. Sudden, unpredictable, unstoppable. April was 32. We'd been married for 8 years, no kids. The day she died, we'd argued about something stupid. Me leaving dirty dishes in the sink again. I remember her face flushed with anger as she stormed out to go to work at the elementary school. I never saw her alive again. After the funeral, I couldn't stand our apartment in Louisville anymore. Every corner held a memory. Every room echoed with her absence. I quit my job at UPS, packed what I could fit in my 2009 Honda Civic, and drove east into the mountains where my grandmother had grown up. I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere different, somewhere I could dissolve into nothing and no one would notice. That's how I ended up in Whitley Gap, a forgotten smudge along Route 119 near the Virginia border. Population 783 according to the sun-bleached welcome sign, though that number must have been painted 20 years ago. The town sits in a narrow valley where the mountains press in close, with just enough flat land for a main street, a couple of churches, and a smattering of houses that climb the lower slopes of the surrounding hills. I rented a small cabin on Pine Mountain Road for almost nothing, $450 a month, utilities included. The landlord, an old man named Buford Jenkins, seemed surprised anyone wanted it. Been empty 3 years since my nephew moved to Cincinnati, he told me, pocketing my deposit without counting it. Might need some airing out. It needed more than airing out. It needed a deep clean, new weather stripping, and probably an exorcism. But it was mine, and April had never set foot in it. That was enough. When my savings started dwindling faster than expected, I knew I needed work. Options are limited in a place like Whitley Gap. The coal mines that once sustained the area are mostly shuttered now, leaving behind black lung disease and generations of bitterness. There's the Dollar General, the post office, a gas station convenience store combo, and Wilder's Market, the only proper grocery store for 20 miles in any direction. I applied at Wilder's because it was closest to my cabin. The manager, Darrell Wilder himself, hired me on the spot when I said I could start immediately. No background check, no references, just a quick once-over and a nod. I got the impression he was desperate. Night shift only, he said, watching me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Stocking shelves, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., $14 an hour. Cash every Friday. I took it without hesitation. After April, I wasn't sleeping much anyway. Might as well get paid for those endless empty hours. That was when he handed me a sheet of paper, rules for working the night shift at Wilder's Market. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Darrell Wilder's rules were typed on a yellowed piece of paper, clearly run through a printer countless times. Coffee stains dotted the corners, and the edges were worn soft like cloth. I read them in my car under the flickering parking lot light before my first shift. Night shift rules, Wilder's Market. 1. Always enter and exit through the back door. Front doors remain locked at all times. 2. Complete stocking in this order: dairy, frozen, canned goods, produce, beverages, household items. 3. The lights in the meat department will turn off at 2:13 a.m. Do not turn them back on until 4:37 a.m. 4. If you hear whistling from aisle 7, continue working, but do not enter that aisle until the whistling stops. 5. Should you find wet footprints leading to the employee restroom, use the customer facilities instead. 6. If a woman with red hair asks where we keep the baby formula, direct her to aisle 3, even if we've moved it. 7. The delivery truck arrives at 3 a.m. Only accept packages from Jim or Callaway. If anyone else is driving, lock the back door and call Mr. Wilder immediately. 8. If the lights flicker 3 times in succession, drop what you're doing and go to the break room for exactly 7 minutes. I stared at the list, reading it twice more. Was this some kind of joke? A hazing ritual for the new guy? I almost drove home, but I needed the money. I'd give it one night at least. If Darrell Wilder was messing with me, I'd walk out and try the Dollar General instead. At 9:55 p.m., I parked behind the store as instructed. The loading dock stood empty under a single sodium light that cast everything in sickly orange. The mountains loomed in the darkness beyond, a deeper black against the night sky. A metal door with peeling gray paint waited at the top of a short flight of concrete steps. The other night stalker was already inside, leaning against a pallet jack when I entered. He was a tall, lanky man with a patchy beard and deep-set eyes that looked perpetually tired. Nathan Powell, he said, extending a rough hand. You must be the new guy from Louisville. I introduced myself, surprised that he knew where I was from. Small town, Nathan explained with a hollow laugh. Everybody knows everything about everybody by sundown the day they arrive. You took the Jenkins cabin up on Pine Mountain. He handed me a box cutter and gestured toward a stack of pallets loaded with merchandise. Let's get started. I'm guessing Daryl gave you the rules? Yeah, I said, testing the blade. What's that about? Some kind of joke? Nathan's face went still, his expression careful. Follow those rules exactly, he said after a pause. Don't ask why. Don't test them. Don't get creative. Just do what they say. I waited for him to crack a smile, to let me in on the prank, but his eyes remained deadly serious. Okay, I said slowly. Starting with dairy, then. For the first hour, everything was normal. We unloaded pallets, broke down boxes, and stocked shelves in the precisely ordered sequence Daryl had stipulated. Nathan was efficient but not talkative, answering my questions with minimal responses. You from around here? I asked as we loaded gallons of milk into the refrigerated cases. Born and raised, he replied, except for 4 years in the army, 2 tours in Afghanistan. What brought you back? His hand stilled momentarily. Nowhere else to go. At midnight, the store felt cavernous. Our footsteps echoed off the high ceiling as we worked our way through canned goods. I was organizing a display of Green Giant corn when I heard it, a soft, melodic whistling coming from several aisles over. I froze, my hand halfway to the shelf. The tune was unfamiliar, eerie in the empty store. It rose and fell in unusual intervals that sounded wrong somehow, like a familiar melody played in a minor key. I looked at Nathan, who had gone completely still beside me. His face had drained of color, and he shook his head slightly when I opened my mouth to speak. The whistling continued for nearly 2 minutes. I counted every second, my heart pounding against my ribs. When it finally stopped, Nathan exhaled shakily. Aisle 7? I whispered. He nodded once. I then continued stocking as if nothing had happened. 20 minutes later, I couldn't stand it anymore. What was that? I asked. Rule number 4, Nathan replied without looking at me. You followed it. Good. But what? Don't. He cut me off. Just don't, man. Not tonight. We worked in silence until 1:30 a.m. when Nathan announced we'd take our break. In the cramped employee room, he finally relaxed slightly, pulling a squash sandwich from his backpack. Look, he said after taking a bite, I know the rules seem weird. They are weird, but they're there for a reason, which is... He set down his sandwich. This town has history. Bad history. The store sits on land that used to be part of the old Whitley mine before the collapse of '58. What collapse? 47 miners died when the main shaft caved in. They could only recover 22 bodies. The rest are still down there somewhere, beneath us. Nathan's eyes drifted to the linoleum floor. My grandfather was one of them. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed and flickered once, making both of us look up. They closed the mine after that, filled in what they could, built this shopping center in the 80s. Nathan crumpled his sandwich wrapper. Breaks over in 2 minutes, ready for the meat department? At 2:10, as we walked back onto the floor, I felt a strange heaviness in the air. A pressure like the moments before a thunderstorm. The meat department was at the far end of the store, the white tile gleaming under bright lights. 3 minutes, Nathan checked his watch. Remember Rule 3. At exactly 2:13 a.m., every light in the meat department shut off in unison. The darkness was absolute. The glow from other sections of the store barely penetrated the blackness that had swallowed the butcher counter, display cases, and preparation area. Don't worry about it, Nathan said, his voice eerily calm. We'll move on to produce, then come back at 4:37. I pulled out my phone to use as a flashlight. Nathan's hand shot out and gripped my wrist with surprising strength. No lights, he hissed. No phones, no lighters, nothing. Rule 3 isn't just about the main switches. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, the skin on my arms prickling. What happens if I turn on a light? Nathan released my wrist. Bobby Leon tried that last year. Used his Zippo to find a box of steaks he dropped. His voice dropped lower. Found something else instead. What did he find? He doesn't work here anymore. Nathan turned away. Let's set up the banana display. As we arranged fruit in the produce section, I kept glancing toward the meat department. The darkness seemed to have substance, like it was slowly bleeding outward into neighboring aisles. I blinked and looked again. Just my imagination. You said your grandfather died in the mine collapse, I said, trying to distract myself. Is that why you came back after the army? Nathan carefully positioned a pineapple. Partly. My grandmother was still alive then. Demented that last winter. He paused, weighing his next words. But I also came back because of the dreams. Dreams started in Afghanistan. Dreams about this place. About coming home to find everyone gone. Walking through empty houses where dinner was still on the table, cars still in driveways, but no people. Just whistling in the distance. He shook his head. PTSD, the doc said, but I knew it wasn't that. It was a warning. I didn't know how to respond. Nathan seemed completely sincere, his eyes focused on some middle distance as he spoke. You new folks think Whitley Gap is just another dying coal town, he continued. But it's more than that. There's a reason property's so cheap here. A reason the young people leave as soon as they can. The overhead speakers crackled suddenly, making me jump. A burst of static filled the store, followed by what sounded like a distant voice speaking words I couldn't quite make out. Ignore it, Nathan said, not even looking up. Just the old PA system acting up. But it didn't sound like system feedback to me. It sounded like a man calling for help. His voice was muffled, as if coming from somewhere deep underground. At 2:45 a.m., we reached the beverage aisle. Nathan was in the middle of explaining how to arrange the soda display when I saw it, a dark puddle spreading from beneath the double doors that led to the stockroom. Nathan, I said, pointing to the growing stain on the linoleum. He followed my gaze and swore under his breath. Back up, he ordered, setting down the case of Mountain Dew he'd been holding. Don't touch it. Don't even get close. The liquid continued to seep forward, thick and dark. In the fluorescent lighting, it had a rusty reddish-black sheen. Is that blood? I whispered. Just don't touch it, Nathan repeated. He glanced at his watch. It's almost 3. The delivery truck will be here soon. As if on cue, I heard the rumble of a diesel engine outside, followed by the beeping of a truck backing up to the loading dock. Nathan's shoulders visibly relaxed. Let's go, he said, carefully skirting the edge of the spreading puddle. You remember Rule 7? I nodded. Only accept deliveries from Jim or Callaway. Good. Let's hope it's one of them tonight. We headed to the back of the store. Nathan pushed open the heavy door to the loading dock, letting in a gust of cold mountain air. A white delivery truck with no markings had backed up to the platform, its engine still running. The driver's side door opened, and a heavy-set man with a gray beard climbed down. Evening, Nathan, the man called, pulling a clipboard from the cab. Got your usual delivery, plus extra flour and sugar. Daryl called it in special yesterday. Evening, Jim, Nathan replied, his tone normal for the first time that night. This is the new guy. Jim nodded to me, his eyes crinkled with what might have been sympathy. First night, huh? Hanging in there? Before I could answer, the passenger door of the truck opened. I hadn't noticed anyone else in the cab. A tall, rail-thin man stepped out, moving with an odd, jerky gait. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Nathan went completely still beside me. Jim? He said quietly. Who's that? Jim turned, confusion crossing his features. What? Nobody. I came alone tonight. The thin man was moving toward the back of the truck now, his movements becoming more fluid with each step. Jim followed my gaze, his eyes widening. Jesus Christ, he breathed, backing away. That ain't nobody I know. Nathan pushed me back through the door. Inside, he ordered. Lock this. Call Daryl. What about Jim? I asked, stumbling backward. Now, Nathan roared, shoving me fully inside before pulling the door shut with a metallic clang. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn it. Through the small safety glass window, I saw Nathan backing Jim toward the truck, both men watching the approaching figure. The stranger had stopped advancing, standing unnaturally still at the edge of the loading dock's pool of light. Though I couldn't see his face clearly, I knew he was staring directly at me through the window. As I watched, he tilted his head at an impossible angle, nearly touching his shoulder with his ear. Then, with jerky movements like a marionette with tangled strings, he began to raise his hand toward his face. Nathan pounded on the door. "Call Daryl!" he shouted, his voice muffled through the thick metal. "Rule 7. Call him." I stumbled backward, breaking eye contact with the stranger, and pulled out my phone. Daryl's number was posted above the time clock. With trembling fingers, I dialed. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. "Who's driving?" he demanded without preamble. "Not Jim or Calloway," I stammered. "There's a thin man in a baseball cap. Nathan locked me inside. And is the door secured?" Daryl cut me off. "Yes, but Nathan and Jim are still out there with—" "Listen carefully," Daryl said, his voice tight with urgency. "Go to aisle 7. There's a trapdoor behind the display of paper towels. Pull the green lever underneath and wait there until I arrive. Do not open the back door for anyone. Not Nathan, not Jim, not me, not Jesus Christ himself until you see my face through the window and I show you my store key with the red tag. Do you understand?" "What about Nathan and Jim?" I repeated. "Do you understand?" Daryl shouted. "Yes," I whispered. "Go, now." I hung up and looked back through the window. Nathan and Jim were both pressed against the truck now. The thin stranger had moved closer, fully in the light. He had his hand on his face, not covering it but gripping it, fingers digging into the skin near his hairline. As I watched in horror, he began to pull downward, stretching the skin like rubber. Beneath it wasn't blood or muscle or bone, but darkness, absolute blackness without feature or form. I tore myself away from the window and ran toward aisle 7, the sound of fingernails scraping against metal following me through the empty store. I sprinted through the empty store, my footsteps echoing off the high ceiling. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, seeming dimmer than before. At aisle 7, paper products and cleaning supplies, I skidded to a stop, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The display of Bounty paper towels stood at the far end, stacked in a neat pyramid. I rushed toward it, glancing back over my shoulder every few steps. No sign of the thin man, but I could hear something moving in the store now. A dragging sound followed by irregular footsteps coming from the direction of the loading dock. The paper towel display was heavier than it looked. I pushed with my shoulder, feeling it slide reluctantly across the linoleum. Beneath it was a square metal hatch flush with the floor with no visible handle. It looked like a service access panel, the kind that might lead to water lines or electrical conduits. In the center was a small keyhole with a faded green lever beside it. The dragging sound grew louder. With shaking hands, I pulled the lever. It moved stiffly, as if rarely used. The hatch released with a soft hiss, revealing a dark opening and the top of a metal ladder descending into blackness. I hesitated for only a second before climbing down, pulling the hatch closed above me. It shut with a definitive clang, plunging me into complete darkness. The sound of my own breathing filled my ears as I carefully felt my way down the rungs. The ladder extended farther than I expected, much farther. I climbed down 20, 30, maybe 40 feet before my foot finally touched solid ground. The air here was cool and damp, with a mineral smell that reminded me of caves. I fumbled for my phone, using the screen's glow to illuminate my surroundings. I stood in a narrow tunnel with rough-hewn walls of dark stone. The ceiling was supported by old wooden beams, weathered and cracked with age. The floor was packed dirt, with tracks worn into it as if many feet had traveled this path over many years. A mine tunnel. I was standing in a section of the old Whitley mine. The realization sent a chill through me. Somewhere above, the thing that wasn't Jim's co-driver was searching for me, while Nathan and Jim might be... No, I couldn't think about that now. I needed to wait for Daryl, just as he'd instructed. I took a few hesitant steps forward, the light from my phone casting grotesque shadows on the tunnel walls. The passage extended straight ahead before curving out of sight. Along the walls, I noticed old mining equipment, picks, shovels, helmets, all coated with decades of dust. Some looked as if they'd been abandoned in haste, dropped where workers had stood. Something glinted in the dirt a few yards ahead. I moved closer, pointing my phone light toward it. A pocket watch lay half buried, its brass case tarnished with age. When I crouched to examine it, I saw that the hands had stopped at 2:13. My blood went cold, the exact time the meat department lights went off. A distant sound reached me, feet shuffling on the ladder. Someone was coming down. I extinguished my phone light and pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding. The sound grew clearer, metal rungs creaking under weight. Then a beam of light cut through the darkness and a familiar voice called out. "It's Daryl Wilder. I have the red-tagged key." Relief flooded through me. I stepped forward, raising my hand to shield my eyes from his flashlight. "Down here!" Daryl reached the bottom of the ladder, his heavy footsteps crunching on the packed earth. He was a stocky man in his 50s with thinning gray hair and the perpetually ruddy complexion of someone with high blood pressure. Tonight, his face was pale and sheened with sweat. "Are you hurt?" he asked, scanning me with the flashlight. "No, but Nathan and Jim, they're fine," Daryl cut me off. "That visitor is gone for now." "What was it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daryl's jaw tightened. "We need to move. It's not safe to stay in one place too long down here, especially near the entrance." He gestured with his flashlight. "This way." I followed him deeper into the tunnel, questions burning in my throat. After several minutes of silent walking, the passage widened into a larger chamber. Battery-powered lanterns hung from the support beams, casting warm pools of light that revealed a makeshift living space. A folding table with chairs, shelves stocked with canned food and water, even a small gas heater. "Emergency shelter," Daryl explained, setting down his flashlight. "Been maintaining it for 20 years now. My father kept it before me." "For what emergency?" I asked, though I was starting to form my own theories. Daryl sank into one of the chairs, suddenly looking much older. "Sit down, son. It's time you learned what you've walked into." I took the seat across from him, waiting. "The Whitley mine wasn't just a coal operation," he began, eyes fixed on the lantern between us. "They dug too deep, opened something that should have stayed buried. The collapse in '58 wasn't an accident. It was intentional, the only way they could think to seal it back up." "Seal what up?" Daryl's eyes met mine. "A hole, a tear between places, our world and somewhere else." He rubbed his face warily. "The miners called it the Hollow, said they could hear voices coming from it, see things that couldn't exist." I thought of the strange whistling in aisle 7, the dark liquid seeping under the stockroom doors, the thing that had been peeling off its face like a mask. "The town elders, my father among them, they tried to contain it," Daryl continued. "They poured concrete down the main shaft, dynamited the secondary entrances. For a while, they thought it worked, but then people started changing." "Changing how?" "Little things at first, speaking differently, moving oddly, then bigger things, not being where they should be, not remembering conversations, showing up miles from home with no memory of how they got there. Some disappeared entirely." He tapped his fingers nervously on the table. "Then we figured it out. Whatever was down there, it could wear people like clothes." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the thin man peeling back his face to reveal darkness underneath. "Skinwalkers," I whispered. Daryl shook his head. "Not exactly. Skinwalkers are native legends. These are something else. We call them hollows. They come up through the thin places like the ground under my store, and they take people, replace them." "And the rules? They protect against these things. They're boundaries, conditions. The hollows can't break certain patterns. They're bound by rules of their own, times, behaviors, limitations. If we follow our rules, we stay safe in their territory." "Their territory?" "This is their territory," Daryl said with a bitter laugh. "About 60 years ago, my grandfather made a deal with whatever's down there. The town was dying after the mine closed. No jobs, no future. He offered a bargain, restricted access to our world in exchange for prosperity. What kind of prosperity? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. You've noticed the store is always fully stocked, never runs out of anything, even when supply trucks can't get through during winter storms. How the produce is always fresh despite being hours from any distribution center. Daryl spread his hands. They provide. We contain. Everyone follows the rules. I stared at him in growing horror. So the entire town knows about this arrangement? The older families do. Newcomers either figure it out and leave, or he trailed off, or they become part of it one way or another. And Nathan? Jim, born here, both from mining families. They understand what's at stake. My mind reeled, trying to process what I was hearing. So I'm supposed to just accept this? Work in a store that's supplied by, what, monsters from another dimension? Interdimensional beings, Daryl corrected, as if the terminology mattered. And yes, if you want to stay in Whitley Gap, and that's the deal. We don't talk about it. We follow the rules. We survive. What happens if someone breaks the rules? Daryl's expression darkened. The Hollows get more access. It's how they claim new vessels. I thought about what Nathan had said about Bobby Leon, who'd lit a match in the dark meat department and found something. A cold realization dawned. He didn't quit, did he? Bobby Leon? Daryl shook his head slowly. No, but something wearing his face walked into the Cumberland River 3 days later. We found his truck at the bridge. Never found him. A heavy silence fell between us. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness beyond the lantern light, the sound echoing through the tunnel. The thing at the loading dock tonight? I finally asked. It was looking for a new vessel? Yes, they've been getting bolder lately. Breaking pattern. Daryl checked his watch. It's 4:30, almost time to go back up. The meat department lights come on in 7 minutes. I stared at him incredulously. You expect me to go back to stocking shelves after all this? No, Daryl said, standing up. I expect you to make a choice. Stay and learn our ways, or leave Whitley Gap by sunrise and never come back. He picked up his flashlight. But if you stay, there are more rules you'll need to learn. Rules for living here, not just working at the market. At that moment, the lanterns flickered. Once, twice, 3 times in succession. Daryl's face drained of color. That's not possible, he whispered. Not down here. A low melodic whistling drifted through the tunnel from somewhere in the darkness beyond our shelter. Someone broke a rule, Daryl said, his voice tight with fear. We need to move now. Daryl snatched a backpack from under the table, quickly stuffing it with supplies, flashlights, batteries, a first aid kit, and bottled water. There's another way out, he said, voice low and urgent. Old ventilation shaft that comes up behind the Baptist church on Hickory Street. The whistling grew louder, the tune more distinct. It was the same eerie melody I'd heard in the store earlier, but deeper, slower, like a record played at the wrong speed. What about Nathan and Jim? I asked, backing toward the tunnel entrance Daryl was indicating. If they followed the rules, they'll be safe, Daryl replied, though he didn't sound convinced. That thing at the loading dock shouldn't have been able to get in. Someone broke containment. We hurried down a narrow passage branching off the main tunnel, the ceiling so low we had to stoop. Our flashlight beams bounced off rough walls slick with moisture, illuminating abandoned mining equipment and the occasional support beam. The air grew colder the further we moved, carrying the unmistakable scent of earth and decay. Your grandmother's cabin, Daryl said suddenly as we navigated a tight corner. It's one of the oldest properties in the area. Did you notice anything unusual there? Markings on the walls, strange noises, cold spots? I thought about my little rental on Pine Mountain Road. There was the perpetually cold bathroom, the basement door that never stayed latched, the occasional sound of scratching that I'd attributed to raccoons in the attic. Maybe, I admitted. Why? The hollow places connect to certain buildings in town. Old structures, mostly. We try to keep them monitored, but your cabin's been empty for years, he glanced back at me. Might be how they've been getting through. Damn it, I should have checked before Buford rented it out. A faint vibration ran through the ground beneath our feet, sending small cascades of dirt raining down from the ceiling. We froze, holding our breath. "What was that?" I whispered. "They're moving." Daryl replied grimly, faster than usual. The whistling had stopped, replaced by a new sound, something like footsteps, but not quite. More like the wet slap of flesh on stone, advancing steadily behind us. We broke into a run, no longer bothering with stealth. The tunnel narrowed further, the air growing thin and stale. My lungs burned as we pushed forward, the beam of my flashlight jumping wildly across the walls. Ahead, I could see the passage sloped upward, wooden slats forming crude steps in the steeper sections. Behind us, the slapping sounds accelerated, accompanied now by a low gurgling moan that made the hair on my neck stand up. "Almost there," Daryl panted, pointing his flashlight toward a metal ladder bolted to the far wall. Above it, a circular hatch was just visible in the ceiling. "That leads to the church basement. Once we're through, they can't follow. Hallowed ground." As we reached the ladder, my flashlight beam swept across the tunnel floor, illuminating something that made my blood freeze. Footprints. Wet, dark footprints leading ahead of us toward the ladder, not following behind, but already ahead. "Daryl," I hissed, pointing. He saw them too, his face hardening. "Go now. I'll hold them off. But go," he barked, pulling something from his jacket pocket, a small glass vial filled with dark liquid. "I've done this before." The wet slapping sounds were almost upon us. I scrambled up the ladder, heart pounding in my ears. The hatch above was secured with a simple latch that slid open under my desperate fingers. I pushed, feeling cool night air rush in as the heavy metal plate swung upward. I emerged into the darkened basement of a church, surrounded by stacked folding chairs and Sunday school supplies. Moonlight filtered through small ground-level windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. I turned back to help Daryl, but what I saw nearly stopped my heart. His flashlight lay abandoned at the base of the ladder, illuminating his legs as he climbed up. But something had hold of his ankle, a long, pale arm stretching up from the darkness below. The hand wasn't right. The fingers too numerous, too long, bent in impossible directions as they wrapped around Daryl's calf. "The vial," Daryl shouted, his face contorted with pain. "In my pocket. Break it on the ground." I reached down, grabbing his jacket, feeling for the pocket. My fingers closed around a second glass vial. I pulled it out, dark liquid, almost black in the dim light, swirling inside like living smoke. "Do it!" Daryl screamed as the thing below gave a powerful yank, nearly pulling him back down. I smashed the vial on the concrete beside the hatch. The liquid splattered, but instead of spreading out, it seemed to sink into the ground, disappearing instantly. A high, inhuman keening sound rose from the tunnel below, and the pale arm released Daryl's leg, withdrawing into the darkness. Daryl hauled himself up, collapsing onto the basement floor beside me. Without hesitation, I slammed the hatch shut and threw the bolt. For several long moments, we lay there in the darkness, our ragged breathing the only sound. Then from below came 3 distinct knocks on the metal hatch. Knock, knock, knock. We both stared at the hatch, paralyzed. Another set of 3 knocks, more insistent this time. "Don't answer," Daryl whispered. "That's the first rule of Whitley Gap. Never answer when they knock in 3s. I nodded mutely, my entire body trembling with fear and exhaustion. After what seemed like an eternity, a different sound came from below, a frustrated screech, followed by the slapping of retreating footsteps. Daryl's shoulders sagged in relief. "What was in that vial?" I asked when I finally found my voice. "Old coal mine remedy," Daryl said, examining the torn fabric of his pant leg. "Mixture of salt, iron filings, and graveyard dirt. Temporary barrier at best, but enough to make them back off." He struggled to his feet, wincing as he put weight on his injured leg. "We should get moving. Dawn's coming, and we need to check on Nathan and Jim." The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as we emerged from the church. The streets of Whitley Gap were deserted, the houses dark and silent. We limped back toward Wilder's Market, taking a circuitous route that kept us in the open, away from shadows and alleyways. And there are others like it, Daryl said as we walked. Towns with arrangements, places where the veil between worlds is thin. He glanced sideways at me. Your wife, April, the aneurysm, was it sudden? No warning signs? I stopped walking, staring at him. How do you know her name? I never told you. Small town, he said, echoing Nathan's words from earlier. But answer the question. Yes, I replied cautiously. It was sudden. She was fine that morning, then gone by afternoon. Daryl nodded as if confirming something to himself. And did she ever mention strange dreams? Hearing voices? Losing time? A cold feeling spread through my chest. Why are you asking this? Because people don't just happen to move to Whitley Gap, Daryl said, his eyes sad but knowing. They're drawn here. Called. By what? By the Hollows, or by those already taken? He gestured for us to continue walking. I think you were meant to come here. I think something wanted you in that cabin on Pine Mountain Road. We rounded the corner, the grocery store coming into view. The parking lot was empty except for Nathan's battered pickup truck and my Honda. The loading dock stood open, the delivery truck nowhere to be seen. I don't understand, I said, my mind reeling. Are you saying April's death wasn't natural? That these hollows had something to do with it? Daryl stopped at the edge of the parking lot, turning to face me. I'm saying you have a choice to make. You can leave town today, drive away, and never look back. Try to forget everything you've seen. He paused, his eyes holding mine. Or you can stay, learn the rules, find out why you were called here. The sun broke over the eastern ridge, spilling golden light across the valley. In the daylight, Whitley Gap looked almost normal, just another struggling small town nestled in the Appalachian hills. But I knew better now. I knew what lurked beneath the surface, behind the everyday facade of Wilder's Market. What would you do? I asked quietly. Daryl's face was grim. If it were my wife, I'd want answers. From inside the store came a sudden sharp sound, glass breaking. We both turned toward the noise. Through the front windows, I could see a figure moving inside, silhouetted against the rising sun. It stood unnaturally still for a moment, then slowly turned toward us. Nathan Powell stared out at us, his face expressionless. But even from this distance, I could see something was wrong with his eyes. They were completely black, like holes cut into reality, and he was smiling. Don't move, Daryl whispered, slowly backing away from the store. Don't let him see you're afraid. But I was afraid, terrified by the sight of Nathan's black eyes and unnatural smile. As we watched, he pressed his palm against the glass of the front door, leaving a dark, wet imprint that seemed to glisten in the morning light. That's not Nathan anymore, is it? I asked, already knowing the answer. No, Daryl confirmed. We need to get to my truck. I keep emergency supplies there. We edged backward toward Daryl's faded blue Silverado parked near the edge of the lot. Inside the store, Nathan, or the thing wearing Nathan's face, tracked our movement, its head turning with mechanical precision. What about Jim? I asked. Daryl's expression tightened. We need to assume the worst. We reached the truck, and Daryl fished keys from his pocket with shaking hands. As he unlocked the door, movement caught my eye. Nathan had disappeared from the front of the store. He's gone, I hissed. Get in now. Daryl yanked the driver's side door open and climbed in. I hurried around to the passenger side, scanning the storefront nervously. The moment I closed my door, a heavy thud sounded from the truck bed behind us. Something had jumped into it. Daryl jammed the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine sputtered but didn't catch. Come on, he muttered, trying again. Slow footsteps moved along the truck bed, approaching the back window. On the third try, the engine roared to life. Daryl threw the truck into reverse, tires squealing as we shot backward. There was a thump and a screech as whatever was in the truck bed was thrown against the cab. I twisted in my seat to look through the rear window. Nathan's body lay sprawled in the truck bed, limbs bent at unnatural angles that should have been impossible with normal human anatomy. As I watched in horror, he began to right himself, bones audibly snapping back into place as he rose to all fours. His head rotated 180 degrees to face me directly, that same empty smile fixed on his features. Jesus Christ, I breathed. recoiling from the sight. Daryl spun the wheel hard, throwing the truck into drive and accelerating toward the exit. Nathan's body slid toward the tailgate, but his hands, fingers now impossibly elongated, dug into the metal of the truck bed, anchoring him. "We can't let it stay attached," Daryl shouted over the roar of the engine. "The rifle under your seat. Get it!" I reached beneath me, fingers closing around cold metal. I pulled out an old lever-action hunting rifle, the woodstock worn smooth with age. "It's loaded," Daryl said, eyes fixed on the road as we careened onto Route 119. "Won't kill it, but might slow it down." I glanced back again. Nathan was clawing his way forward, those black eyes locked on me. His mouth had opened wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of teeth like a shark's. With trembling hands, I rolled down my window and awkwardly positioned the rifle, trying to aim at the thing that had once been Nathan Powell. "I've never fired a gun before," I admitted, the rifle wavering in my grip. "Just pull the trigger," Daryl said grimly. "And don't hesitate. That's not your friend anymore." I squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against my shoulder, the report deafeningly loud in the confines of the truck cab. The shot went wide, splintering the corner of the truck bed. The thing wearing Nathan's face didn't even flinch. It continued its advance, mouth stretching impossibly wider. I worked the lever, chambering another round, and fired again. This time, the bullet struck Nathan's shoulder, spinning him sideways. Black liquid that was definitely not blood sprayed from the wound, sizzling where it touched the metal of the truck. But still, he came on. "Aim for the head," Daryl shouted, swerving onto a narrow side road that wound up into the hills. "Between the eyes." I chambered another round, trying to steady my breathing. Nathan was nearly at the back window now, like one elongated hand reaching for the glass. I centered the sights between those bottomless black eyes and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck true, punching a neat hole in the center of Nathan's forehead. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his face seemed to collapse inward, the features melting like wax under a flame. The black eyes liquefied, running down his cheeks like tears. His mouth stretched in a silent scream as his entire head began to cave in on itself. What remained of Nathan's body convulsed once, then fell limp. As we took a sharp corner, it slid from the truck bed and tumbled onto the road behind us, already dissolving into a dark, viscous puddle. "Did I kill him?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Daryl's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Nathan was already gone, but you stopped the hollow wearing him, temporarily at least." We drove in silence for several minutes, climbing higher into the mountains. Pine trees crowded close to the road, their shadows stretching across the pavement. Eventually, Daryl pulled over at a scenic overlook, cutting the engine. Below us, Whitley Gap looked peaceful in the morning light. A small collection of buildings nestled in the narrow valley, smoke rising from a few chimneys, the church steeple gleaming white against the green hillsides. "We can't go back there," I said, still clutching the rifle like a lifeline. "Not yet," Daryl agreed. "There's somewhere else we need to go first." He pointed to a dirt road barely visible through the trees. "Old fire tower up that way. Been using it as a safe house for situations like this." 20 minutes later, we pulled up to a metal fire observation tower perched on one of the highest ridges in the area. The structure rose 60 feet above the summit, a small cabin at the top, accessible by a series of metal staircases that zigzagged up the framework. "Not many people know it's still maintained," Daryl explained as we climbed the stairs. "Forest Service abandoned it officially back in the 90s when they switched to satellite monitoring for wildfires." The cabin at the top was small but surprisingly well equipped. Solar panels on the roof powered a small refrigerator and electric lights. A ham radio sat on a desk beside topographic maps of the surrounding area. Gun racks lined one wall, holding rifles, shotguns, and boxes of ammunition. A wood stove occupied one corner, with a neatly stacked supply of firewood beside it. "My father established this place," Daryl said, securing the trapdoor we'd climbed through. "Called it the Watchtower. It's where we come when there's a breach." How often does that happen? I asked, setting the rifle down carefully. Not often. Maybe once every few years. Daryl moved to the windows, scanning the forest below with binoculars. But it's getting worse, more frequent. Something's changed. I sank into a chair, exhaustion finally catching up with me. The hollow that took Nathan? Will it come for us eventually? Maybe, Daryl replied, still watching the forest. But they don't like heights or open spaces, prefer to stay underground or inside buildings where the shadows are deeper. He set down the binoculars and turned to face me. Now we need to talk about you and why you're really here. I told you why I came to Whitley Gap, I said defensively, after April died. You didn't choose Whitley Gap by accident, Daryl interrupted. Nobody does. This place calls to people who've had contact with the hollow places. He pulled a thick ledger from a shelf and laid it on the table between us. This is the town registry. Goes back to 1912 when my great-grandfather was mayor. He opened it, flipping through yellowed pages filled with neat handwriting. Everyone who comes to Whitley Gap gets recorded, their names, where they came from, why they claim they're here, and the real reason. He stopped at a page near the end, turning the book so I could see. My name was there, written in blue ink along with the date I'd arrived and the address of my cabin. Beside it, in a column labeled Claimed Purpose, someone had written, Escape after wife's death. But it was the final column that made my blood run cold. Under Actual Connection, a single word was written, Marked. What does that mean? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Marked how? Daryl turned to another page, this one containing a rough sketch of a symbol. A circle with a vertical line bisecting it, strange angular markings arrayed around the perimeter. Seen this anywhere? Maybe on April? A birthmark, a scar, something that looked like a tattoo? A memory surfaced. April in our bathroom, studying her shoulder in the mirror, concerned about a strange circular mark that had appeared overnight. She'd scheduled a dermatologist appointment, worried it might be skin cancer. But she died 3 days before the appointment. She had something like that, I admitted, on her shoulder. It appeared a few weeks before she died. Daryl nodded grimly. The hollows mark those they plan to take. Sometimes the marks appear years before they come for the person. You're saying these things killed my wife? Caused her aneurysm? Not exactly, Daryl said. The hollows don't care about our bodies. They want what's inside. Consciousness, soul, whatever you want to call it. The aneurysm was likely a side effect of them trying to create space for themselves. So they tried to take April, and it killed her instead. It happens sometimes. Not everyone is compatible. Daryl's voice sunk slightly. The ones who aren't become beacons, drawing their loved ones to places like Whitley Gap where the barriers are thinner. I stared at him, the implications sinking in. I've been dreaming about her since she died. Dreams where she's trying to tell me something, but I can't hear her. That's how it works, Daryl confirmed. The hollows use the connection between people like bait. So I'm just another victim lured here to be taken like Nathan was? Maybe. Or maybe there's another reason. Daryl returned to the window, gazing out at the forest below. Some people can fight back, resist the hollows, even drive them out. People with certain qualities. What qualities? Strength of will, clarity of purpose, or sometimes just sheer stubbornness. A faint smile crossed his face. My grandfather had it, called it mountain grit. It's why he was able to make the bargain in the first place. The hollows respected him, feared him even. The ham radio on the desk suddenly crackled to life. Static gave way to a voice. Daryl, you there? It's Jim. Jim Calloway. Over. Daryl lunged for the radio, snatching up the microphone. Jim? Where are you? Are you safe? Over. I'm at the church with Pastor Mike and a few others. That thing that came with the truck? It's not alone. There are more of them in town. Nathan's gone, and so are the Petersons from the hardware store. Over. How many people do you have with you? Over. Daryl's voice was tense. 11. All clean, as far as we can tell. We've been checking for the signs like you taught us. Over. Stay put. The church grounds will hold them off for now. We're at the watchtower. I'll contact the other safe houses, see who's accounted for. Over. There's something else, Daryl. Jim's voice lowered. They're gathering at Wilder's market. Dozens of them. It's like they're waiting for something. Over. Daryl's eyes met mine, his expression grave. What time's sunset today? Over. 7:42 p.m., about 10 hours from now. Over. Keep the radio on. I'll be in touch. Over and out. Daryl set down the microphone, his face ashen. What happens at sunset? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. The barriers weaken at night, Daryl said. Always have, but once a year on the anniversary of the mine collapse, they disappear entirely for a few hours. He turned to the calendar on the wall. Today's date was circled in red, and that's tonight. What does that mean? It means the Hollows won't just be able to take people one by one. Daryl's voice was deadly serious. They'll be able to come through all at once, and nothing, not the church, not the safe houses, nothing will be able to keep them out. So what do we do? I asked. Daryl opened a lockbox mounted to the wall, removing a folded paper sealed with wax. We used the contingency plan my grandfather created, a way to collapse the connections permanently. He broke the seal, unfolding the paper. But we'll need to go back to where it all started. The mine? I guessed. No, Daryl said, sliding the paper across the table to me. Your cabin. The paper Daryl had given me contained a hand-drawn map of my cabin, but with markings and annotations I didn't recognize. Dotted lines connected various points in and around the structure, forming a pattern that reminded me of a circuit diagram. X's marked specific locations, one in the center of the basement floor, another at the northeast corner of the property, a third under what appeared to be the front porch steps. What am I looking at? I asked, studying the faded ink. A containment diagram, Daryl explained. Your cabin sits on a convergence point, a place where the barrier between our world and theirs is particularly thin. He tapped the X in the basement. That's the main access point. The others are secondary bleeds. So my cabin is some kind of portal? More like a door that was improperly sealed. Daryl moved to a cabinet, retrieving several canvas bags, which he began filling with supplies. When the mine collapsed in '58, the energy from the hollow places sought new pathways to the surface. Your cabin was built in '59 by a miner who survived the collapse, Elias Jenkins, Buford's relative, his father. Elias knew what he was doing. Building on that spot, he designed the cabin specifically to contain the bleed, channeling it through controlled points that could be monitored. Daryl handed me one of the mouths. But after he died, the maintenance stopped. Buford never believed the old stories, thought his father was crazy. I peered into the bag, salt, iron nails, small glass vials similar to what Daryl had used in the tunnel, bundles of dried herbs tied with twine, and a hunting knife with strange symbols etched into the blade. And we're going to... what? Close these access points? We're going to try. Daryl checked his watch. But we need to move quickly. The sun's getting higher, which means the hollows will be retreating to dark places, like your basement. He unfolded a topographic map, tracing a route with his finger. We can't take the main roads. They'll be watching those. We'll need to go cross-country through the old logging trails. It's longer, but safer. We descended from the fire tower, loading our supplies into Daryl's truck. As we prepared to leave, Daryl paused, handing me a revolver from the gun rack. Smith & Wesson .357, he said. Iron bullets with salt cores. Won't kill a hollow, but it'll disrupt their form long enough for you to get away. 6 shots, so make them count. The weight of the gun was unfamiliar and uncomfortable in my hand, but I tucked it into my waistband, hoping I wouldn't need to use it. The logging road was little more than a rutted track winding through dense forest. Daryl drove with practiced ease, navigating around washouts and fallen branches. The truck's suspension groaned in protest as we bounced over rocks and through shallow creek crossings. How long have you known about all this? I asked, bracing myself against the dashboard as we lurched down a particularly steep section. My whole life, Daryl replied. My grandfather explained it to me when I was 12, said someone in the family always had to know, had to maintain the balance. A bitter smile crossed his face. My father drank himself to death trying to forget, left it all to me. And you just accepted it? Kept running the store, enforcing the rules, feeding these things? What choice did I have? Daryl's voice hardened. Leave? Let the whole town be taken. The bargain was made before I was born, but the consequences would fall on everyone if it broke. He swerved to avoid a fallen log. Besides, it's not like the hollows are all bad. The store never fails. Crops always produce. No one in Whitley Gap goes hungry or lacks for basic needs. At the cost of what? Living in fear? Human sacrifices when someone breaks a rule? It's a balance, Daryl insisted. Or it was, until recently. Something's changed in the last few months. The hollows are getting more aggressive, more numerous. Rules that worked for decades aren't holding them back anymore. We fell silent as the truck labored up a steep incline, emerging suddenly from the tree line into a small clearing. Daryl stopped, cutting the engine. We walk from here, he said. Your cabin's just over that ridge. Better to approach quietly. We shouldered our bags and began hiking through the underbrush, moving from tree to tree, alert for any sign of movement. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals, just the soft crunch of our footsteps on fallen leaves and the distant murmur of wind in the treetops. As we crested the ridge, my cabin came into view in the small clearing below. From this distance, it looked peaceful. A simple one-story structure with a covered porch and metal roof, smoke curling from the stone chimney. I froze mid-step. I didn't leave a fire going, I whispered. Daryl pulled me down behind a fallen tree, eyes fixed on the cabin. Someone's there. We watched for several minutes. Nothing moved, but the smoke continued to rise from the chimney in a steady column. Finally, Daryl pointed to a trail that curved around to the back of the property. We'll circle behind, coming through the trees where they won't be expecting us, he murmured. Stay low and move quietly. We made our way around the perimeter of the clearing, using the dense forest as cover. As we approached the back of the cabin, I could see the small shed where Buford stored his maintenance tools, and beyond it, the storm cellar doors that led to the basement. The basement with the main access point marked on the map. The storm cellar doors were open, yawning like a dark mouth against the earth. They're already inside, Daryl whispered. We need to see what we're dealing with before we go in. We crept closer, staying within the tree line. A window on the back of the cabin provided a view into the kitchen. Daryl raised his binoculars, studying the interior. I can see movement, he reported. At least 2 figures. One of them is not right. Proportions are wrong. He handed me the binoculars. I raised them to my eyes, adjusting the focus. Through the slightly dirty window, I could make out 2 people in my kitchen. One was a woman I didn't recognize, short and heavyset, standing unnaturally still beside the refrigerator. The other, my blood turned to ice water. The other was April. My wife, who I had buried 3 months ago, was standing in my kitchen, peering into the cast iron pot on the stove as if checking a recipe. That's April, I choked out, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the binoculars. My wife. Daryl took them back, looking again. No, he said firmly. That's not your wife. It's a hollow wearing her form. They can do that. Take the appearance of the dead, especially those they've marked. But how? She's buried in Louisville. They couldn't have her body. They don't need physical remains, just memories, yours primarily. They're drawn to grief, to that connection that remains after death. Daryl's voice was tight with tension. This changes things. If they're using her image, it means they know exactly who you are and why you're here. Why am I here? I demanded, tearing my eyes away from the cabin. You keep saying I was drawn here, marked, connected to all this. Tell me why. Daryl hesitated, then reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded photograph. It showed a group of men standing in front of what looked like a mine entrance, wearing hard hats and carrying pickaxes. Whitley Mine, 1957, he said, the year before the collapse. He pointed to a man in the center of the group, tall, lean, with a serious expression. Elias Jenkins. He built your cabin. Then his finger moved to another figure, younger, standing at the edge of the frame. "And that's your grandfather, Marcus." I stared at the photo in shock. My grandfather had died before I was born. All I knew about him came from my mother's occasional references, that he'd been a coal miner in Kentucky before moving to Ohio, where he met my grandmother. My grandfather worked in the Whitley mine. "He was there the day they broke through to the hollow place," Daryl said. "One of only 3 men in that excavation team who survived the initial contact. The other 2 died within a year. Madness, the official record said, but your grandfather escaped, moved away, started a new life." "What does that have to do with me?" "The Hollows never forgot him, never forgave him either. He was the one who warned the others, who started the evacuation before the full collapse." Daryl took back the photo. "You have his blood, his resistance. That's why April was marked. They couldn't get to you directly, so they tried to use her as a conduit. And when that failed, they drew me here instead." "Yes." Daryl's expression was grim. "They want to finish what they started with your grandfather, but they also fear what you might be capable of, carrying his blood." Movement near the storm cellar caught my attention. A figure was emerging, tall and thin, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, the same entity from the delivery truck. "We need to move," Daryl whispered. "They're gathering, preparing for sundown." "What's the plan?" I asked, unable to tear my eyes away from the cabin where the thing wearing my dead wife's face was still visible through the window. The diagram shows anchor points, places where Elias built containment mechanisms into the structure. Daryl patted his bag. "We need to reach those points, reinforce them with the materials we brought." "And how do we get past them?" Daryl's gaze hardened. "We don't. We go through them." He reached into his bag, pulling out what looked like a homemade pipe bomb, a metal cylinder wrapped in duct tape with a fuse protruding from one end. "Iron shrapnel, salt, and graveyard dirt," he explained. "It won't kill them, but it'll create enough chaos for us to get inside. Once there, you go for the basement while I secure the exterior points." "The basement? Where that thing just came from?" "The main access point is there. It's the key to everything." Daryl handed me a small cloth pouch. "This contains a seal written in the old language. Place it directly on the spot marked on the map, then pour the contents of the red vial in a circle around it." I stared at the cabin, at the storm cellar where darkness waited, at the window where something wearing my wife's face stood in my kitchen. Fear and anger roared within me, but beneath them was something else. A determination I hadn't felt since April died. A clarity of purpose. "Let's end this," I said. Daryl nodded, striking a match. "When this goes off, run straight for the cellar. Don't stop. Don't look back. And whatever happens, don't listen to her voice." He lit the fuse, counted to 3, and hurled the device toward the back steps of the cabin. The explosion tore through the quiet afternoon, sending splinters of wood and metal flying in all directions. The back steps of the cabin disintegrated in a cloud of dust and debris. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard inhuman shrieks of pain and anger. "Now!" Daryl shouted, already sprinting toward the storm cellar. I ran, focusing only on the open cellar doors ahead. Behind me, chaos erupted. The thing wearing the heavy-set woman's form burst from the back door, its body contorting in ways human joints shouldn't allow. The thin man in the baseball cap was writhing on the ground, dark liquid seeping from wounds where iron shrapnel had embedded in his flesh. I didn't look for April's doppelganger. I couldn't. Daryl reached the cellar first, yanking a flashlight from his belt and plunging into the darkness below. I followed, nearly tumbling down the steep wooden steps in my haste. The air in the cellar was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, a metallic ozone-like scent that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Lock the doors," Daryl yelled, already moving deeper into the basement. I turned back, grabbing for the interior latches of the cellar doors. As I reached for them, a hand shot through the narrowing gap, a woman's hand with my wife's wedding ring still on the finger. "Honey," April's voice, exactly as I remembered it. "Why are you running from me? I've been looking everywhere for you." Something inside me cracked at the sound of her voice. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. It's not her. Daryl's voice cut through my momentary weakness. Remember what she really is. With a surge of desperate strength, I slammed the doors, crushing the fingers caught between them. Instead of blood and broken bones, black ichor sprayed from the severed digits, sizzling where it touched the metal hinges. I threw the heavy wooden bar across the doors just as something slammed into them from the outside, making the entire structure shudder. It won't hold them long, Daryl warned, sweeping his flashlight across the basement. We need to find the access point. The basement was larger than I remembered from my brief inspection when I had first rented the cabin. Rough stone walls supported by ancient timber beams enclosed a space about 30 feet square. The floor was packed earth in most places, with a section of poured concrete near the furnace. Shelves lined the walls, holding dusty mason jars, abandoned tools, and cardboard boxes whose contents I'd never bothered to examine. There, Daryl said, pointing to the center of the room where a perfect circle of flat stones was set into the dirt floor. That's it. We approached cautiously. The stone circle was about 6 feet in diameter, each stone carved with symbols similar to those on the map. In the very center was a metal plate, embossed with the same bisected circle design I'd seen in the town registry. Your grandfather helped design this, Daryl explained, kneeling at the edge of the circle. After he escaped Whitley Gap, he came back secretly to work with Elias. They created this seal to contain what was coming through. So what do we do now? Reinforce it? The original binding is failing. Daryl opened his bag, removing bundles of herbs, vials of liquid, and small iron tokens shaped like crosses. I'll start the preparatory work. You need to get the other anchor points. He handed me the map again, indicating 2 X marks on opposite sides of the basement. There should be smaller metal plates embedded in the walls at these locations. Place a pouch and 3 iron nails at each one. Then pour salt in a half circle in front. I took the supplies and headed to the nearest marked spot, using my phone's flashlight to examine the rough stone wall. Sure enough, partially hidden behind a wooden shelf, I found a small metal plate with the same symbol. I placed the pouch against it, hammering in the 3 iron nails around its edges with a rock I found nearby. As I poured the salt in a semicircle, it seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Above us, something heavy crashed against the floor, making dust rain down from the ceiling beams. They're inside the cabin, I called to Daryl, moving quickly to the second anchor point. Hurry, he replied, not looking up from his work at the central circle. He had arranged his materials in a complex pattern around the metal plate and was reciting something under his breath. Not quite a prayer, but something rhythmic and old-sounding. I found the second plate behind the furnace, repeating the process with the pouch, nails, and salt. As I finished, a new sound reached us, a soft, melodic whistling coming from directly above, the same eerie tune I'd heard in the store. Daryl, I warned. There, the cellar doors exploded inward in a shower of splinters and broken metal. Silhouetted against the fading daylight outside were 3 figures. The thin man, now moving with jerky, broken motions, the heavy-set woman, her body twisted at impossible angles, and April, or the thing wearing her form, standing perfectly still at the center. Don't stop, Daryl shouted, continuing his ritual at the circle. Whatever happens, complete the seal. The 3 figures started down the cellar steps, moving with unnatural synchronicity. I pulled the revolver from my waistband, aiming at the thin man who led the way. Stay back, I warned, my voice shaking. April's lips curved into a smile that was nothing like my wife's. You won't shoot me, she said, her voice a perfect imitation that tore at my heart. You couldn't even bring yourself to throw away my clothes. She was right. I'd packed up her things in boxes, but couldn't bear to dispose of them, leaving them stacked in our Louisville apartment when I fled. That's not April, I told myself aloud, shifting my aim toward her. My wife is dead. Am I? The thing wearing her face asked, taking another step down. Or did I just find my way back through the dark? Back to you? She extended her hand, my wife's wedding ring glinting in the dim light. I've been so lost, waiting for you to find me. My hand trembled on the gun. Behind me, Daryl's chanting grew louder, more urgent. "The final anchor point," he shouted between phrases. "Northeast corner. Go." I backed away from the steps, keeping the gun trained on the approaching figures. The northeast corner was the furthest from the entrance, behind a stack of moldering cardboard boxes. I would have to cross the basement, passing close to the central circle where Daryl worked. "I'll cover you," Daryl said, pulling his own revolver. "Go!" I turned and ran, hearing gunshots behind me as Daryl fired at the intruders. Their inhuman screams echoed off the stone walls. I pushed aside the boxes, frantically searching for the metal plate. "There's nowhere to run," April's voice called, closer now. "Why are you fighting this? Don't you want us to be together again?" I found the plate, half hidden behind an old water heater, quickly pressing the pouch against it and hammering in the nails with the butt of my revolver. As I reached for the salt in my bag, something cold wrapped around my ankle. Looking down, I saw a hand emerging from the dirt floor, fingers elongated into claw-like appendages that dug into my flesh. I cried out, trying to pull free as more hands erupted from the ground, dozens of them, reaching, grasping, pulling. "It's fighting back," Daryl shouted from across the room. "The seal. Complete it." I emptied the salt pouch with one desperate motion, forming a rough semicircle around the plate. The effect was immediate. The hands recoiled from the barrier as if burned, sinking back into the earth with a chorus of hisses and moans. At the central circle, Daryl had constructed an elaborate arrangement of symbols using iron filings, salt, and what looked like dried blood. The metal plate was now glowing with a dull red light, pulsing like a heartbeat. "It's working," he called. "We just need to." His words cut off as the heavyset woman's form lunged at him, knocking him away from the circle. They crashed into a shelving unit, sending mason jars shattering across the floor. I ran back toward the center, pulling the red vial from my pocket as instructed. The thin man blocked my path, his body now barely recognizable as human. Limbs bent and multiplied, head twisted completely backward, black ichor dripping from every orifice. I fired the revolver at point-blank range. The iron bullet tore through his chest, leaving a smoking hole. He staggered back but didn't fall. I fired again and again, each shot pushing him further from the circle until the gun clicked empty. Daryl was struggling with the heavyset woman, her arms now elongated into tentacle-like appendages that wrapped around his throat. I grabbed a broken shelf board and swung it at her, connecting with a wet thud that would have killed a normal human. She merely turned toward me, her face splitting into a vertical maw lined with needle teeth. "The vial!" Daryl gasped, breaking free of her grip. "Complete the circle." I sprinted for the central stone circle, uncorking the red vial as I ran. The liquid inside was thick and dark, smelling of rust and salt. I began pouring it around the perimeter of the stones, completing the circuit Daryl had begun. "No!" April's voice cried out behind me. I turned to see her standing at the edge of the circle, looking exactly as she had the morning of her death. Hair pulled back, cheeks flushed with emotion, eyes bright with tears. "Please don't do this. You'll trap me here forever." My hand froze, the vial still half full. "It's trying to stop you," Daryl warned, still grappling with the other creature. "That's not April." "But what if it is?" I whispered, doubt crushing my resolve. "What if some part of her is in there?" April's face softened with the smile I'd fallen in love with. "I'm still here, baby. I found a way back to you. Please don't send me away again." She reached toward me, stepping into the circle. As her foot crossed the boundary, the symbols Daryl had arranged flared with sudden light. April's expression contorted in pain, her form flickering like a bad television signal, momentarily revealing something dark and writhing beneath the human disguise. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Whatever stood before me contained nothing of my wife. It was a hollow thing, empty of everything except hunger and malice, wearing her face like a mask. With a cry of rage and grief, I upended the remaining liquid, completing the circle. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The ground beneath us trembled, and a high-pitched keen filled the air. The three creatures convulsed simultaneously, their human forms melting away to reveal their true nature. Seething masses of darkness shot through with veins of sickly yellow light. "The words," Daryl shouted, throwing a folded paper toward me. "Read them." I caught the paper, unfolding it with shaking hands to reveal text in a language I didn't recognize. But as my eyes fell on the strange symbols, I found I could pronounce them, the sounds rising from some ancestral memory buried in my bones. As I spoke the final syllable, the metal plate at the center of the circle erupted with blinding white light. A force like a shockwave rippled outward, throwing me off my feet. The creatures screamed, not with human voices now, but with a sound like tearing metal and breaking glass. The light grew to unbearable intensity, forcing me to shield my eyes. Through my fingers, I watched as the three entities were pulled toward the circle as if caught in a powerful vortex, their forms stretching and distorting before being sucked down into the metal plate at the center. With a final thunderous concussion, the light vanished, plunging the basement into darkness. Silence fell, broken only by my ragged breathing and Daryl's pained groans. "Did it work?" I asked, my voice hoarse from the words I'd spoken. Daryl dragged himself to the edge of the circle, examining the now dormant metal plate. "Yes," he confirmed, "the breach is sealed. For how long? If we did it right, forever." He slumped back against the wall, exhaustion plain on his face. "Your grandfather would be proud." Outside, through the shattered cellar doors, the last light of day was fading from the sky. But for the first time in months, the darkness held no terror for me. 2 months have passed since that night in the basement. Whitley Gap is different now, quieter, more ordinary. The strange rules that once governed Wilder's Market have faded into irrelevance, replaced by the mundane concerns of a small-town grocery store. Inventory, staffing, competition from the Dollar General. I stayed, surprising myself and probably Daryl too. When the dust settled and the shadows retreated, I found I couldn't leave. Something in the air here speaks to me. Not the malevolent whispers of the hollows, but something older and more honest. The mountains themselves, perhaps, or the echo of my grandfather's footsteps on this same soil. Jim Calloway survived, along with most of the townspeople who had taken shelter in the church. We lost 7 residents that night. Their bodies were found wandering the woods days later, vacant-eyed and unresponsive, eventually succumbing to what the county coroner diplomatically called unknown neurological events. Nathan wasn't among them. Whatever had been wearing his form wasn't connected to his actual body. According to Daryl, the real Nathan had likely been gone for weeks before I arrived, taken during the late night at the store when he'd broken one of the rules. The cabin on Pine Mountain is mine now, properly mine. Buford Jenkins signed over the deed after Daryl explained the heavily edited version of what happened. "That place always gave me the creeps," Buford admitted as he handed me the papers. "Dad used to say it was specially built. Guess he was right after all." I've been renovating it, stripping away decades of neglect, reinforcing the foundations, and maintaining the anchor points as Daryl taught me. The basement has been cleaned out, the central circle now covered by a hand-woven rug gifted to me by Pastor Mike's wife, its pattern subtly echoing the symbols beneath, a reminder hidden in plain sight. Daryl and I check the seals monthly, a ritual that's become something between a maintenance chore and a religious observance. We don't speak much during these inspections, but there's an understanding between us, guardians of a secret that shaped this town for generations. The store has changed too. The meat department lights stay on all night now. Aisle 7 is just another aisle, stocked with paper towels and cleaning products. The night shift rules have been reduced to standard operating procedures, stocking priorities, break schedules, inventory counts. Nothing supernatural remains, at least not on the surface. Sometimes when I'm working the late shift, I imagine I hear whistling from the far end of the store, but it's just the wind in the eaves or the old refrigeration unit cycling on. At least that's what I tell myself. I visit April's grave when I can make the trip back to Louisville. I talk to her there, really talk to her about everything that happened, about the hollows and the cabin and my grandfather's legacy, about moving forward while keeping her memory sacred. The real her, not the twisted echo the hollows created. Last night, as I was closing up the store, Daryl handed me a small wooden box with a bisected circle carved into its lid. Your grandfather left this with my father, he explained, said it should go to his grandson when the time was right. Inside was a pocket watch, brass casing tarnished with age, hands stopped at 2:13. A note tucked beneath it read simply, "Some doors stay closed only if someone remembers to check the locks." I wear the watch now, though it doesn't tell time. It doesn't need to. Its purpose is different, a reminder that some rules still matter. Some boundaries must still be maintained. And every night at 2:13, I check the locks, just to be sure. Because in Whitley Gap, some things are worth being careful about.